why kids are coming in to see us at the Wellness Center. Contraception is a big piece as to why kids are coming in. Illness and injury, seeing the majority of the kids, over 600 students. Immunizations, a small pocket of them. A large pocket of over 300, I think it's 356 that are seen for mental health challenges. STI being sexual transmitted infections. I should have put that not in an acronym. And then pregnancy testing and follow-up as our small population there of under 100. It's not just positive pregnancy, so that's pregnancy testing, just to clarify that. And typically our students are between the ages of 13 and 18 at the John Barsby School, but we see now up to age 25, youth up to age 25 at the NAC. So I've just summarized that on the bottom there. So we'll go into more detail about the stats, but I think now Wilma's going to just quickly talk to our Wellness Center evaluation framework that we did in 2018. Here's the little thing.
Hello, thank you very much for having us present today. I've given you lots of slides on our evaluation that occurred. The report came out in October of 2018. It was provided to us by the Institute of Health Services Transformation and Sustainability. So we were really lucky to have the funding provided and the powerhouse of those people provided to give this evaluation. I've given you lots of slides. Most of them you're going to have to kind of look over on your own because we don't have enough time for all that. But I wanted you to have sort of a real gist of what happened with the evaluation. Do I just click it?
Decide.
Decide. Okay. There we go. So I don't think I need to tell you that youth are a special population. I think you know that part already. But we also see them as a very vulnerable population because they don't really readily access health services, and we heard a little bit of that already from Erin. And so, you know, this holistic, multidisciplinary approach can be really valuable when we have to provide healthcare services to youth. And I think, again, you can sort of look at some of that detail on your own. Like I said, the students are, the youth are definitely what we consider vulnerable, and that's because they often don't access healthcare services readily on their own. They're not attached to their family doctor if they have one, or many of them don't have a family doctor. We know that's a real challenge here in Nanaimo. And I was recently at a meeting that talked about when we look at sort of the medical services plan data, that there's, I believe, 7,000 people in this community that actually are considered unknown, which means they haven't actually accessed MSP services for 5 years. So these are youth that are often just not accessing health services at all. And we know that the Wellness Center has now provided them an avenue to get that care for them. So we know that sometimes they'll go and see a doctor, can't see this too well, but for physical concerns or injury. But we know that youth will often go to the internet or to their peers when they have a mental wellness issue. And that's often not the place we really want them to go and access that kind of care. And so the other thing that sort of came really clearly out of the evaluation is that the youth, many of them are not rating their physical health well. Their physical health being 10%, or 10% of them are saying their physical health is fair to poor, and 27% of them, their mental and emotional health is fair to poor. And we know that there's a lot of risk-taking behaviors that are important there. Which slide are you supposed to start on?
The next one.
Oh, there we go. I spoke fast. Next.
All right. So I'll bring up the last little bit here because I know we're really tight on time. One of the things I want to sort of comment on is I am one of the physicians who works in the clinic, and it can sort of breaking out. This was similar to the slides that were presented earlier when we did the pre-need assessments, and this is more kind of midway assessments. And when you look at the kind of the breakdown about why kids say they've come and seen us, you know, certainly mental health, sexual health is a presenting complaint, and a big chunk of that is that 50% physical illness and injury. I can say often that's the reason why the kids will come in and present. You know, they've punched a locker, they've twisted their ankle in rugby practice, they've had a concussion, they've got a cough. And from that, often it's leading to that, again, that kids learning to feel safe, and the health literacy part about then being potentially opening up to other reasons why they might be seeking help. So often within this, I'll see kids and I'll talk to be like, hey, so why are you punching the locker? You know, or, you know, that's interesting, you've got a cough. Are you smoking? Or today, I screened everybody, all the youth I saw today were vaping. So again, it's providing that avenue for kids to learn to access and knowing what you can seek help for, that it's, you know, not necessarily just thank you, you know, your twisted knee or ankle. Again, I'll kind of move through the last bit because I feel like we're already out of time. So again, some of the kind of commentaries from everybody who accesses or is touched by our healthcare system, and these wellness clinics, including educators, staff at the Wellness Center and our youth. Overall, when we looked at the evaluation, you know, they did see an improvement of physical health, mental health, again, health literacy, which I think is a huge key part of what we do, and, you know, want to make behavioral changes and improve their health. And again, students, staff, educators, providers, all seeing very positive benefits to our location of services right where youth are and will access. And again, I can't sort of under stress the importance of, you know, building health literacy. And as we all know, certainly with education, is that healthier youth do better at school, are more likely to graduate. And, you know, that's reflected in a lot of studies, and it's certainly reflected in some of our evaluations. So just being able to manage their health and mental well-being better, as well as, you know, we do provide a lot of help and guidance about what's happening at home and help to supports along that and liaison with that. So, I mean, again, it's more than just treating the sprained knee, which many different people could do in many different access. We very much take a holistic approach. So again, more kind of comments on. Of course, we're always in the background about, you know, how do we sustain this, you know? And that's a big question that we're continuing to try and work on in access, because it is a partnership between various different groups, including the school district, family physicians, Island Health, you know, public health. But again, we're all just sort of bit by bit trying to make this a more robust and sustainable part, including evolving the youth voice and the parent voice. This is my favorite slide from this whole evaluation that came through, was what kind of value does this produce? Because we always like to dollar and cents it. And so they basically were able to, in their analysis that's far beyond my capacity to do, essentially every dollar that we spend, we have an $8.31 social return on investment. And if you go into a lot of the other discussions they talk about, recently on the way in, CBC was talking about this national lunch program that they want to put into schools, and they said that's got an awesome return of $1, you get $3 out. Well, we beat that substantially, right? So yes, absolutely, lunch for all the kids, but this provides dollars and cents beyond just the impact that we know. So again, strong partnerships, good governance and leadership. School-based, so being where kids are accessing, so at the school, at the aquatic center, you know. And again, quick acknowledgements of some of our partners, there's so many more, but of course, you know, school district, Tilcomleelam, you know, the ministry, Island Health, public health, you know, physicians, so family physicians, pediatricians, you know, and our psychiatry, are all being huge supports and guidance and provide care within this. I think that's our thank you.
Well done.
I'm squeaking my way through this with streps out.
And there's a link there to the full evaluation report. It's available.
Yeah.
Easily,
thank you.
so if you're interested in reading that.
It's really well done too. And yeah. So
Well, thank you for your presentation. It's actually really interesting, and I wish we had more time, but I'm hoping that you'll be willing to stay with us for a little while longer as we ask some questions. I saw Trustee O'Neill actually, I think, put your hand up there?
Yeah, I have 3 questions.
Okay.
I'll start with one. I was wondering if you could expand on what the difference in services between Discovery and the MCFD. They're very relatively close in what they're providing to the students, and I'm not as familiar with what those services look like.
Within the Wellness Center, they're both providing very similar services in that they're providing sort of a short-term counseling for any kind of presentation that might need to be seen within youth and a counseling setting. Outside though, so Discovery Youth Services is primarily substance use, and then the ministry is more kind of, hate to separate the two out, but kind of general mental health. But within the centers, they're both providing mental health counseling and then appropriate links to community services. So they'll often see the youth, I hate to use the term, and they don't want us to use this term, crisis counseling, but sort of short interventional counseling, and then helping to connect them into other services that are more appropriate.
And often the youth that are there don't know what the counselor that they're seeing, which program they're attached to. They just believe them to be a counselor attached to the wellness center. Whether they're coming from Discovery Substance Use or coming from the ministry, they don't have that information. Unless they're following them for other reasons outside of the wellness center report. That was one question though.
That was one, but I'd like to wait my turn.
Okay.
So I'm told I should wait my turn.
Fair enough.
Trustee Higginson, I've heard you, but Trustee Brzezowicz is going to be going next.
Thank you. You had mentioned nurses and such. Do you guys have the capacity to utilize practicum students within your program?
Well, we do partner with UBC medical faculty, so we do see students that are from the Division of Family Practice. We have had quite a number of residents.
We've had resident physicians, so UBC Family Practice Residency Program. We've also been looking at opportunities for potentially pediatric residents being involved, and there have been some nurses.
We have nursing students, but one of the important keys we have is that we really want to be able to have the students connecting to a relationship that's built. So we really try to avoid having just somebody there that the students don't see that familiar face. So when we do have a student, it's usually more of a long-term investment over time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Tons of interesting information as usual. Every time we hear from you folks, it's really fascinating. I'm so proud of this program. I have a couple questions about how and if you are connecting with the school staff of the schools that you're servicing, and in terms of connecting with them about needs of the students, or even whether we're looking at how the impact of having the wellness centers embedded in the schools has had on the health and wellness of the overall student population and culture of the school. So just wondering what kind of connections you make with the school staff.
Well, at Barsby, because we're situated right in the school and have been for 5 years, I think that the relationship's getting better and better in working with the counselors at the school and the administrative staff. And of course, it's always changing, so the relationship work is continual. But we see more and more collaboration with the school district counselors and administration with the frontline physicians and nurses that are working in the center. So it's constantly growing and evolving.
Today, just to give an example that's at the top of my head, I had 2 referrals in from school staff of youth to come into the clinic today.
And teachers within the school often bring a student down if they're concerned about a student, bring them right to the door. It's a little bit more difficult with that direct correlation at the Nanaimo Aquatic Center because we're just ever so slightly removed. But there's benefits of that too, because we're seeing that a bit older population of kids that have moved out of high school and are now looking for services. Does that answer the question, sort of?
And Trustee Higginson, just since you're not here, I did see Jane Reynolds enthusiastically shaking her head in agreement that there is benefit. So, at least for Barsby's perspective, I'm assuming.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great for our students to be able to just access that, and otherwise they want to not have the ability to.
Right.
And we've seen students treated for a variety of things from, it's really great that they can just go there and have that consistent service.
I I'm next on the list. So acknowledging that, as you said, there's lots of presenting issues, but sometimes presenting issues are really manifesting like underlying psychiatric or psychological issues. I'm wondering, so there doesn't seem to be a psychologist or by assuming doctor meant like a family practice, but I'm wondering if there was any psychiatric or psychological doctors, and if that was something that you were hoping for or purposely didn't want.
I would say that, so family physicians do the vast majority of mental health. I think it would be great if we had, access to a psychologist. I don't think that there's a capacity for that. I mean, we do work quite closely with Air Central Island Psychiatric Services. Currently, we have one psychiatrist for this entire region. So again, we partner quite closely with them, and when it's appropriate for youth to see them or contact in with them, we do refer to them and work quite closely with them. And then, but again, we rely quite heavily again on our counselors and link into child and youth mental health. So it's actually works best in this system than any other system I've worked with, about the strong connection with other mental health services. Whereas often in a traditional family practice, you're kind of like, here, go to intake, right? So we have a lot more kind of what we would call warm communication, warm handoff, and working back and forth. And so we get a lot of feedback from both of that.
Thank you. I'll add you to the list. We have Trustee Barron next, actually.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I think some of it you started addressing after I'd already put up my hand, but I guess just to clarify, because I've been in the Barsby Wellness site before, and it's a very welcoming environment with chairs and couches, and the youth are able to go in there and build relationships, and I would imagine that a lot of the services that they're accessing are a result of them being comfortable in that space and building those relationships. And I did go into the newer space now at NAC, and although I think there's many benefits to having it there, I'm wondering if you're seeing some differences. And so Erin, you spoke a little bit about seeing some youth between 18 and 25, but are you seeing the same capacity of sort of walk-in secondary school age students coming to the NAC site as you are at the Barsby site? Are there any significant differences in between the two?
There are some differences. I mean, sometimes good things about one place are also its worst enemy. So, one of the struggles that we have at the Barsby Wellness Center is just that it becomes too comfortable a place to hang out. And so constantly working on that boundaries around when you can hang out in here and when you need to be going back to class. Whereas at NDSS, that challenge doesn't exist because there isn't that hangout type location. Our numbers and our stats are still proving that the kids from NDSS are accessing services at an increasing rate. I mean, NDSS has a higher population of students than Barsby does, but many of the Barsby students, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, then slowly as they feel more and more comfortable there, start accessing as they get older. So I think time will tell that story a little bit better in terms of what that will look like. We also text our students at the aquatic center a little bit more than we do at John Barsby. So students come in, they want to see a doctor, they want to see a nurse, they can't in that moment, so we would say, we'll text you when we can see you, and then they come and go. Because one thing we've learned is that they don't follow appointment schedules very well, and so booking appointments hasn't really been one of the things that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, so I did see the statistics for the NAC earlier this week from Mr. Harding down at the city, because I think you shared those. And
I can share them with anybody that wants to see them.
Yeah, so a steady increase, right, in students accessing. December I saw was about 150 students for 2.5 days a week is, in my mind, pretty significant. So it's getting well utilized as well.
And that was down from November, which was 170 because of our closure over the Christmas breaks. Potentially that could be to the point where we are beyond capacity for space.
So that's good news, thank you.
Yeah, it's great.
Trustee Keller?
Yes, thank you. So I'm not sure that we can answer this question tonight, but I'd love to hear a little bit more and learn the context around the program, because I think it's excellent in terms of how it got established and what opportunities there may be to expand into some of our other facilities. So I don't know if this is a place to ask that, but that's one thing that I'm interested in learning more about.
And we didn't cover what happens in some of our other high schools, but it almost sounds like we're doing all these wonderful things in 2 of them and nothing in the other ones, but we are providing services in Wellington, Ladysmith High School, Dover, and Cedar Secondary with a public health nurse regularly. Not to the same capacity as what the Wellness Center at John Barsby or the Nanaimo Aquatic Center offers, but we are starting to provide those services and also seeing great uptake at those schools with the nurses, and then they liaise with the Nanaimo Aquatic Center physicians and counselors when necessary. That's a small answer to probably Wilma has some history pieces about that.
I don't know if I have history pieces. I think there was a slide around sustainability, and I think we all are committed to sustaining and building on this. I think this is a future for healthcare in our province. But we live in a system that still is very stuck in an acute care center kind of model of care. And I think part of the reason that it's really important that we're presenting to you tonight is that you can take away this message that we all need to come together to support these really important initiatives. We would love to be able to expand into other schools. But, at some point, the in-kind contribution has maxed out. And so, we're rallying with our health authority and with our government to actually, trickle a little bit of money. I mean, you can see the social return on investment. It's pretty clear. But to trickle a little money this way so we can actually build and grow. And it will eventually. But, this is something that I think this is a message we all need to be pushing up through the channels because it's huge. The most important piece for these kids is they're building trust in the health system. They're building trust in a system that can provide them health care. And that sort of understanding of how to access health services is just so crucial for their future.
With Trustee O'Neill's permission, I'm going to jump the queue because my question's right on this topic. Is that, are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. So I want to follow up on that because my question was to assuming that you would like to, or the hope is to expand. What are the, and you already answered it, but I kind of want to, I want you to expand on your answer there. I'm wondering about what the barriers are to broadening into, across the school district into other schools. So obviously funding is something that you were just talking about, but.
Yeah, so, obviously this Barsby initiative, which is where it started, was, a lot of in-kind support. The school district provided its own in-kind support to that. And, we have public health nurses that, are doing the most that they can. There's no more funding for nurses to do more of this in other schools. The same for even sort of physician compensation pieces. They come from different pockets, but, there needs to be funding for those things. And the whole, to me, and I'm not a finance or economics person, but in the whole world of healthcare finance, I don't think it's a whole lot of money, but there needs to be opportunities for that to be funded. So I'm not sure if that really answers that. Sort of.
It does. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Especially with public health nurses that are there. They're the ones that are there staffing the center for the day. And then the counselors and the physicians, we create a schedule that works so that everyone can get a bit of coverage for every area of the day, but the public health nurse is the person that remains consistent at each site all the time, every day, all day, without fail. So we need more of them because they have a capacity that only exists to the point of what resources we have are there. So, yeah.
So thank you with gratitude to Trustee O'Neill. It's your turn.
No problem. Mine is similar in that, along similar lines, and I wanted to know if you could expand a bit on how the services go beyond the age of 18. So I think because this is, a bigger service that's being provided, and I can't help but draw the linkages to what happens when children age out of MCFD programs, right? And there's so I'm happy to hear that service is being offered beyond school-aged years, but wondering how that works.
Well, they just can walk in.
It's that simple?
It's that simple. I mean, we're trying to slowly get ourselves out there so we don't get too inundated with every single kid out there that's not connected to a primary care provider. But basically, we're open all the time for anybody that's anywhere from the ages of 13, 14, all the way up until 25. And there's no barriers to accessing service. And the goal of the Wellness Center at Barsby would be to transition the kids out of the Wellness Center at John Barsby into the Wellness Center at the Nanaimo Aquatic Center, and many of the physicians, counselors, and nurses that work at one site overlapping the other site, so they'll see that face continue on in terms of feeling comfortable in the area and the space and the relationships with people that they've already connected with.
And I mean, and this also again goes back to a lot of the health literacy that we alluded to. It's also just, trying to get youth importance of having a primary care practitioner, of course, if they can find one. But I mean, some youth is reconnecting back with, if they do have a primary care practitioner, if they're moving to another community, say if they're going to a university, a different place, about accessing students' health services at the university if they have one. And we do a lot of that kind of work and that kind of connection. And I mean, I think that this is a huge underpinning about when we originally started this, is a very much awareness of the transitional years, right? It's that those transitional years and so many elements of pediatric care transitioning to adult care is a huge gap, right? So then it's a huge focus of ours about trying to, again, sort of teach and lead, and like, how do you access this? And if you do move to a community that only has a walk-in clinic, how do you access that appropriately, efficiently? We try to do a lot of that work. But even before we had the aquatic center with the extended year, the kids that were graduating out, they needed more continuity of care. We definitely continued to work with them to make sure that they weren't just left. Hey, you graduated, sorry. We worked hard with that and continue to.
Trustee Brisnich?
I think you kind of hit on what I was going to ask, because what I was going to ask about is these people when they hit 25. How are you working with them to sort of get them to figure out how to connect to the community so that when they can't access you, that they're connecting with doctors?
Yeah, and we do a lot of that. I mean, and again, it's evolving. What primary care is evolving, and on the province as a whole. But I mean, currently we have, our new urgent care at Medical Arts, and so again, explaining how that works, how do you access it, that they can be your primary care home and follow you along, and how do you find a family doc, and you're moving to a different community. We spend that time with the youth that need it, yeah. And we're always happy to try and help as best we can.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Robinson?
First of all, we're really lucky, I don't have to say that, to have you people and the facility and what's going on. And most of my questions have been answered, but I've known Wilma and her husband Tony. He and I worked on a number of projects together. You guys you never stand still. So what's the very next thing you're going to do to move?
I guess, really we're so committed to this. We just really want to allow for opportunities for sustainability and expansion. And I say we're running on a thread because we do, and it's an outlier still. I mean, there are examples of this across the province, but not, I don't think, to the same robustness. And really just giving that message to our leaders that this is something that they do need to recognize and put money into. So I think that's something we'll continue to do. We do meet with government as well around these things. I have a project that I'm doing in elementary schools that's kind of its own little piece, and trying to bring family primary care and family practice into that. But again, I'm hitting my own barriers with that because of funding issues. So it's just kind of giving these key messages and having people sort of realize that this is a really huge preventative and promotion opportunity for our future generations. I mean, you're in education, this is our future, but really telling our systems that they have to recognize that is still a big barrier for us. So.
And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say thank you for the energy, persistence, and more persistence that you put in to get us started at Varsity. Thank you for that.
And we have small goals within the actual wellness center too, around just engaging with the male youth population better, engaging with the Indigenous youth population more effectively, because we know that we're seeing girls, but we know who we're not seeing. So working on how to engage the populations of kids that aren't accessing care, and often those are at-risk youth that we want to figure out together with the youth what will make them access services at the wellness center, what we can do differently, or how we can engage in better ways. So that's something we're always looking at.
And I think it underpins the importance that, youth is a special population and they need a special type of care, right? That they don't necessarily can access, that doesn't exist other places. So we're continuing to grow and expand and make sure that we're hitting who we need to hit, but that you just can't take a adult model and say it's going to work for kids, because we know that's not true.
And it's not a piece of cake either, right? So I always say to Aaron and Sandy, we're making it up as we go along. And we are, because every time we turn around, there's another thing we kind of have to figure out how we're going to do that. And we have a couple of those on our plate right now. And they're big. They're big issues that we need to figure out how we're going to make that one work and keep this sustainable. So those continue to keep us on our toes. Up to the ground. Yeah, thanks.
We have one last question from Trustee O'Neill before we... You're done? Okay, so Superintendent Sale will just kind to wrap things up.
Well, I'll wrap it up by saying thank you for your commitment and passion, and we always enjoy your presentations, and we know these wellness centers are being well utilized, and we appreciate you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So we're moving on to senior staff reports. I believe Steve Daley.
Mrs. Wilson and I would just like a chance to kind of set the stage a little bit to provide some context, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Daley.
Okay. I think it's Daley.
There we go. All right. Just wait a minute.
Yeah.
While we're waiting, I'll just mention that not only is your package slightly different than what we're going to say, we slid in another slide. So part of what we're going to do tonight when we're talking about inclusive education and giving an update on what we're doing across the district, we have a number of guests. Is everybody over here speaking tonight? Yeah, all these people. There's on this whole thing. And they're going to talk to you about some of the things that are happening at the school level and the classroom. Then we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening across the district. Okay. So when we were preparing for this presentation, we were looking for what really encompasses what we think we should be talking about tonight. And Carrie found this slide, and it speaks to what we do and what our core values are. That when we try to develop schools that are inclusive and meet the needs of all children, we have to have processes in place that treat children with respect and dignity and create environments that when they stumble and fall and their behavior may not be what we hope it would be, we have systems that can turn it into learning as opposed to being punitive. Oh, I think we're ready to do that. You good? So tonight we're going to focus on two areas, and the presentation will be broken up approximately 50% on each. We want to talk about safe, caring, and inclusive environments, and the presentations for that will be from Steve Daley. He'll speak to us about his classroom. We also have Jane Reynolds from Barsby and her crew, and they'll talk about their inclusive practices at the school level. And then Carrie and I will give a few more examples of other schools, and then we'll move into some of our district initiatives. The second piece around educative, preventative, and restorative approaches, which is a passion of mine. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things we believe across the districts, some of the work that's already been done, and then we're going to have Mr. Travers come up and talk about his restorative culture at his school, the Ladysmith Secondary.
Okay, so as Margaret said, we're going to start with a little bit of a look at some examples of the ways that we nurture safe, caring, and inclusive environments in our schools. So I'm going to toggle away to Mr. Daley's slides here, and we'll bring him up with these. Even my eyes cannot see.
So we're quite the crew. Carrie's only got one eye working, and I've only got one hip working. So we haven't been drinking. There's nothing else.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Good. Thank you. Just the one on the side. Thank you for that. My name is Steve Daley. I teach grade 1 at Forest Park Elementary, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some strategies that work for me when creating inclusive, safe spaces for learning. Since receiving this opportunity, it's made me think of what it really does take. And although I don't have one recipe working for all students, this is my approach. So my first slide is on the physical environment. My physical space has evolved over the 3 years that I've been teaching grade 1. I've collected various items, a little difficult to see in this photo, but I can explain them in a moment, to comfort and help the students regulate and stay calm in our class. I use dim lighting. I don't use the fluorescents. Other items that I have in my room, I have some comfy chairs, little rocking chairs that are, 6-7-year-old size. I have a couple of larger rocking chairs that I use and I allow the children to use as well. In the center of my room, I use a cube. You can see it's cut out there, it's white. Students sit in there, safe spot, they read in there, take breaks. I teach from that space a lot as well, center of the room. Pardon? I built that for my son. It became a garage ornament, so it made its way into the classroom. I have a teepee that I bring out periodically, more of an enclosed space for the student to take a break. Again, read, individual whiteboards, so they kind of maybe do a little bit of writing in there. Again, I have my rocking chair. I have wobbly chairs at the table groups. It's a couple of stand-up desks. You can see one in the very bottom corner, one is on the other side of the room. And I have a few pairs of noise-canceling headphones just to allow the students to take a few breaks. Bring some plant life into the classroom, and I do my best to keep minimal clutter in there, just to keep the physical environment simple. And although my door is kept closed for temperature control, I have an open door policy for all students. Past students often come into my room for a quick hug or a quick high five, and it provides the opportunity for my current students to see connections they have made. Meaningful relationships. Each morning I open my door and greet the students with high fives. I ignore the parents out there since I am teaching grade 1 until my students have entered the room, and then I'll check in with the parents to make sure there's nothing pressing and wish them a great day. The purpose of that is to make my students feel validated and to observe their body language to see how the day has started. I learn the interest of my students and try to relate to them. Having these connections create a bond and begin the process of their sense of belonging and connection to my classroom. I often share stories about my own children to allow them to learn about my personal life, and I joke around a lot, which shows my students my playful side. Along with this, I teach them strategies to calm themselves and regulate their state for better learning. And once I've done this, I have a good understanding of their personality and I can play to their strengths. Universal design for learning. I do a lot of station work, but mainly for my literacy, I do daily 5 in my room, which allows for individual work time, as well as time to confer with each student. This method teaches independence and holds students accountable for their learning. It also provides opportunities for students to teach each other, as you can see in the photo here. I have two stronger readers in my room. Actually, Jackie took this photo the other day, and one of my more challenging students for reading, they're teaching them their own strategies, so it's nice to see. So I feel this brings ownership to their learning, and they can share their strategies that work for them and apply it to peer learning. And I believe in flexible delivery. I'm not afraid to veer off from my lesson plan when an important question arises during instruction. I believe this teachable moment makes the student feel important and that the questions matter. I front load a lot at the beginning of the year, and my expectations are set out very clear, and I always follow through with my word. Students learn they'll be rewarded for expected behaviors, and I give out penalties for unexpected behaviors. I explain the rationale behind all expectations and help students learn from their mistakes. I do my best to deal with students in my own class and not send them elsewhere. I believe this helps build trust and accountability in an inclusive environment. I try to keep the playing field fairly even when dealing with my students. They know that I'm in charge in the classroom, but I do my best to allow them opportunities to manage their behavior. This may include finding alternate spaces from the first slide on their own if they feel the need. Students can use tools such as the noise cancelling headphones, some type of fidget tools that are in little boxes around the room, or just a simple movement break to regulate themselves. And my slide here is a team effort. As you can see, we have nice support. Everybody in the photos here. We have a real good team at Forest Park, so I feel that creating a safe environment around the school is essential for student success. We have a great staff, very supportive of each other, and involved admin willing to support in any way possible. And I'm fortunate to have Jackie next door as my go-to. Her and I work very well together and support each other during hard and successful times. Having such a colleague makes creating a safe, inclusive environment much easier as we support each other when learning how to differentiate our teaching. Our student support staff do their best to push in to make all learners feel included. Our counselors strategically support and check in on vulnerable students whenever possible. And personally, I'm a team guy. I still play sports to this day. And the acronym team, together everybody achieves more, has a lot of truth for me. We teach our students to work with us, not against us. And this happens by building trust. So when we build trust, barriers are broken. Students can feel safe and willing to take risks, knowing they'll be supported. And in conclusion, creating inclusive, safe spaces changes daily. I know that what the students have gone through the night before, it changes on a nightly basis. I start fresh each day with a clear mind and try to make each student feel included and wanted every time they walk in my room. I hold students accountable for their action and truly feel proud of their accomplishments. I regularly speak with my colleagues in administration and continually learn from them. I do love my job and I never think that I have all the answers, but when asked the question how to create inclusive, safe space, I like to keep my answer pretty simple. Get to know the kid, make them feel welcome, and teach their strengths. Accept that students come to school each day in a variety of emotional states, and do your best to differentiate your lessons to allow them to feel success, and be willing to adapt to meet their learning needs. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
We're gonna, if we can borrow you for a minute, ask some questions.
Sounds good.
That would be great. I see at least two hands. Trustee Robinson?
More of a comment to start.
Thank you.
Well, I was thinking about when I started grade 1. I can't remember the teacher's name, but she was quite lovely and came to my mother's funeral many years later. I sat beside a heating duct up in the wall that she told me I would know where my desk was. There were probably 30 of us all in rows. She taught one lesson, and that's the way they taught. I am just so freaking impressed. I know our teacher no longer talk to the middle, but how you do all the different things that you're doing individually with kids.
It's a team effort.
Yeah, well, that's why I bowed over here as well. Thank you for what you do and for inspiring other teachers to do similar things.
Appreciate that.
And Trustee O'Neill has a question, or perhaps a comment as well?
Well, what Phil said, but boy, there were so many pieces that resonated with me. I have a 3.5-year-old, I kept him up very late last night for business and work, and we woke up this morning and he was a teenager. So had he been coming into your class, he would have been dealing with a cranky teenager. So I really appreciate, this sort of idea of checking in every morning. And yeah, equally wowed at, it sounds like your space has been thoughtful of every child's needs, and I, hope every classroom has that type of environment, if not now, into the future. My question is about front loading. Can you tell me, what does that mean, front loading at the beginning of the year?
Just especially at the younger ages, simple expectations on appropriate behavior and expected behaviors within the classroom, outside of the classroom, out on the playground. We do a lot of that as a school, even at the beginning of the year, and I talk to it a lot in the school. A lot of common sense to us, but in 6 and 7-year-old mind, it's not. So teaching them how to be in other people's spaces appropriately, lining up at the door, hanging their stuff up for organization. So just a lot of the expectations that I would expect to see in my room right now, it takes a lot of effort at the beginning of the year, sometimes stepping back. And even with our teaching style, with some of our classrooms in there, with the Daley 5 and doing math stations, how to appropriately transition to different stations and move around the room if they are even going to take a break. So if they're going in the cube, in the egg chair in the back, whatever it may be, what's the expected behavior and what's an appropriate time to have a break for. So teaching that front loading at the beginning, it just makes the year a lot easier if you can, get some of these routines down within a month or two, September, October.
Just a quick follow-up. I'm so glad I asked, because so it sounds like it's more around sort of the social piece of learning for kids to help them through the educational. I was thinking you did all the tough studies at the beginning of the year, and easier and easier. But I guess that argument.
So making everybody feel welcome in the room and and comfortable. So
thank you.
Can I be on the list?
Yes, Trustee Higginson, you can go next.
So I can go now?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that was quick. I have two questions. One, awesome, thank you so much for the presentation. Did I lose you guys? I just got a weird sound.
No, you're here.
Okay, sorry. Weird beeping sound. Thank you for the presentation. So I have two questions. One is for a presenter and one is for senior staff. The first for a presenter is, what are the elements that you find to be foundational in allowing you to be so successful at creating this environment? I'm looking for, is it strong leadership? Is it all, access to all these tools? Is it some great professional learning that you've had access to? Is it your PLC? What is it that's allowed you to be so successful in your practice? And I'll ask my senior staff question next on the list. You can put me back on the list.
I could speak to all of those points that you said. It's a team effort. It's trial and error. It's being willing to adapt on the go. It's being willing to accept that this isn't working for this group or this child and switching it up. It really is just being flexible and not being scared to take risks myself, have the students take risks, and if we fail, we learn from our mistakes.
Trustee Higginson, do you want to ask your question to senior staff?
Sure. So my second question, thanks for letting me go so quickly, is this is excellent practice and really inspiring to listen to. So how do we, or what does our staff do to ensure that this is, the norm and systematic across our classrooms, across the district? Because we're not there yet, but I believe we can get there. So I'm wondering what elements we do at the district level to support this type of teaching and learning and to support every teacher becoming like this, and what we do when we see some folks who might need some help getting there.
So that question is one of the reasons that we invited Mr. Daley to come tonight, actually, because one of the things that we're really trying to do is surface these practices across the district and celebrate them and draw attention to the things that are really valuable and benefiting our kids. We have some really specific initiatives, which we'll go into a little bit more detail about as we go on, but one of the things, for example, that we were going to speak to a bit later is maybe I'll talk about the elementary one and then you can talk about the secondary one. We have a thing we call the DIG series right now, so it's a district inclusion gathering, and we have 3 sessions scheduled throughout the school year where an administrator is coming with a classroom teacher, and we have kind of half the elementary schools one day and the other half the next, And we've done some really deliberate planning around understanding inclusion and these aspects of classroom programming and universal design for learning strategies related to academics, related to social emotional learning, related to behavior and the environment and all that kind of stuff. And we're just trying to learn alongside each other and make sure that we're sharing best practices and having good dialogue about it. We created this beautiful, well, I'm saying we, really, our learning coordinators created this beautiful matrix that itemizes a bunch of those things. You know, there's 7 or 10 things under environment and another dozen or so under behavior, under literacy, under numeracy, so that when teachers are scanning their classrooms or school-based teams are problem solving and they're looking at things, they've got a reference point they can come back to. And you know, we know that we have this handful of learners that are struggling in this space. What can we do to support the environment? We can go down the list of environmental suggestions and figure out which ones are either in place already and could you know, benefit from additional things, or are there resources that let us get to some of the ones we're not doing yet? What do we need to do? You want to talk about secondary?
Sure. At secondary, we are starting a learning series as well, and our first session is in February. I believe it's next week. We front-loaded it a bit when we asked the teams to bring us some information, student voice, what were classroom teachers seeing, what from a counselor's perspective, what were they seeing, leadership team, and we're coming together to look at what is best practice, what can we share from that, what do we know from literature. And then from those sessions, we're going to be building some rubrics around, in Tier 1, this is what a successful classroom would look like, and these are some of the resources you might use. And accompanying that document, we're also building something, who do you need to go to if you're looking for something to support a child? So the roles and responsibility of counselors, which are different than CYCs, different from classroom teachers, and the leadership team. So we're really excited about it, and we're glad you asked.
I think we have some more specific examples that are kind of included as part of the presentation too. We can speak to some more things that are happening across the system.
Superintendent Sewell, you kind of made a noise that you were going to say something there.
No, I think they covered that very well.
Okay, just checking in.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing if there's any other questions. If not, I'll jump on here. So thank you for your presentation and your display of like exceptional practice, right? Like we need teachers like you. And so my understanding of, and I'm actually I'm look to you and your team, because this is really a question about the school as a whole in some ways. And so from what I see, what you just described, which is consistent with restorative practices, is that notion of, you know, co-creating a behavioral agreement, like you said, front-loading the expectations in a preventative way, right? Like explaining to kids and having them buy into the idea of what is appropriate behavior. And that's a kind of a core piece of the restorative part, is that kind of preventative piece. So what I'm wondering is, you know, given that you have put effort into that aspect of it, how do you, or how does the school, I guess, address the behaviors on the playground? So they're not occurring necessarily in your classroom, but how is it that, you know, given all the work that you've done, what happens when behaviors show up on the playground, and how is that worked out from a team perspective?
Well, if I'm understanding you correctly, we do our best, obviously, to have the same expectations of the students out on the playground. And I think each classroom teacher at our school is well aware of, you know, maybe some different behaviors that are exhibited out on the playground, but what we try to do is teach our students, you know, appropriate behaviors there. And personally, if a duty, or if I'm out on supervision, if I'm made aware of a situation, I will follow up with one of my students, and they know that I'm going to be following up with them, and we'll try and figure out, like, get to the bottom of it and why they felt picking up sticks when we're supposed to keep everything on the ground was a good idea. They think they're going to get away with it, but there's enough eyes out there. So as a team, we're always collaborating, we're always talking. Our administration's out there all the time and checking in with us, especially if we do have some of our vulnerable students that are continually, you know, not making the best choices for themselves. So we're all well aware of it, and I think the big thing for us is communication, where we all know with our higher risk students, per se, out on the playground, we try to either create a different space, or they can follow around our buddy system of some type. And if there is still problems with it's communication, and we go back to the drawing board if it's not working, and we try to figure something out.
before Christmas doing our school. We have school conversations. We go and visit each site, and when we were on our tour and we visited the doorway, we didn't really want to leave. And he chatted with us for 2 or 3 minutes in the doorway, and every learner in the room kept doing while we were there. Reading kept happening and work kept happening, and it was really quite magical. So thank you. Okay, moving on from the school set or the classroom setting, we wanted to broaden things out a little bit. And John Barsby School has been doing a ton of work around enhancing inclusive practices at their site this year. And so we wanted Ms. Reynolds to come and share a little bit. I think you've got a team tonight, right? So we'll just find our way into your presentation, and then do you know which one it is? Paula, do you know which one it is? Is it this one?
It says Barsby on it.
See it there. Okay, let's just.
Okay.
No, that's Mississippi. So. Sorry, my eyes are really terrible when it's coming. Barsby, great. There we got it.
How do I make it play? Sorry for something.
Yeah, you might have to.
We'll get to that in a minute. I need your help. Okay, you guys ready? Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Jane Reynolds. I'm the principal at Barsby Secondary School. I started in special education in 1998 before I went into administration.
I'm Teresa Craker, I'm vice principal at John Barsby, and I too started in special education in 1998.
No way. Wait.
So my name is Stephen Epp, and I am an inclusion support teacher. And I really started in special education in 2019. So I've been in and out doing a number of things over the last few years, and this is really the first year that I've really been in it as an inclusion support teacher.
So our presentation today, we want to share our journey. We have revisioned student support through an inclusive lens. So this speaks to goal number 2, which you are all familiar with. And these are some of the values that we feel like our model highlights. So I'm going to start off. When I first came to Barsby last February, so a year ago, I had come from Parksville Qualicum, and it was a very different lens in terms of inclusion support in that district. So the first thing I did was sort of take a scan at what was happening at Barsby. And honestly, what I saw, it was almost like a step back in time in some ways. Like, I hate to say that, but there was a lot of support blocks out there, in fact 37. And we also had kids that were coming into the school and were streamed into a different cohort. So taking notes from elementary school, here's Jane, she's 2 or more years behind in math, because math is not my strong suit, so she should go in this linear program where the other kids were doing semester. So there's a lot of streaming happening. We also had special students in our skills programs who weren't able to take electives that they wanted. Got one student who absolutely wanted band. I wasn't able to take it, and this year now he's finally able to. There's a lot of pull-out. A student needed service, so it was go to the special room. And a lot of oversubscription. So some of our programs like LEAP, which is sort of for higher level school completion certificates, was overpopulated. So way too many kids in there. So that's what I saw when I first came. That was a big eye-opener.
So then we decided that we needed to do some restructuring, and one of the questions was, how do we restructure our school-based team? And typically, and in my experience, and I've been at 4 different high schools in the district, a school-based team meeting is set up much like this, in that all staff associated with student support services are at a table, sometimes upwards of 20 people, every person needing to discuss a student And then when you couple that with individual referrals that came from classroom teachers, the conversations ended up being not fulsome enough, not problem-solving enough, because there was too many people at the table to discuss all the student needs at that time. So our question was, how do we reorganize our school-based team meetings, so that they're more efficient, more effective, and best honor the time of the people that are sitting around the table. So at Barsby, we already had a little bit of a structure in that our admin and our counseling were set up by alpha teams. So I work with Natalie Sorensen, counselor, and we work with the students M through Z, and Jeff and Haley, they work with students who are A through L, and we decided to continue on with that structure and build 2 alpha teams, 2 student support teams that are based around where your last name falls in the alphabet. And we built a team of professionals that allowed us to really speak to and look at students in a holistic way. We have child and youth family support workers, we have counselors and admin, we have student support academic teachers, and we have in-reach support teachers, and also Aboriginal education teachers and Aboriginal educational assistants. And it was really important to us that we included those Aboriginal voices, because what has been the case in the past is if a student needs Aboriginal education support, they are referred to the Aboriginal education team. We're really trying to break down those silos of support, and so by doing so, we're saying that all of us are on the Aboriginal education support team. By doing this, by sort of separating our teams like this by alpha, we're able to have really focused, holistic conversations about students in need. And then you'll see the pyramid at the top. That's sort of our RTI pyramid, strictly speaking though to the layers of support within our support model. And Stephen's going to describe some of those.
Yeah, so this year we've really changed in three different areas. We have what's called an inclusion support teacher. I'm one of 4. The inclusion support teachers will go into classrooms. We'll really work on those tier 1 interventions with the students as well as the teachers. Within classes, we will work with individual students, or we may work with a small group of students on those. And we're, again, a support coming in, okay? Teachers have the ability to sign us up to come work with students based on what they're doing on a particular day. We've also have a number of students who we have targeted based on our formative feedback and our NLPS literacy and numeracy assessments. Okay, and so those are students that we will also go in and work with one-on-one. Okay. Another area that we've changed a little bit this year is previously we did what was called outreach, where we had a teacher within our building. He'd go outside of the building and he would work with students. We're really focusing on in our building this year, trying to create those connections with the students before they leave our building, right? So trying to create those relationships with the students that are kind of on the teetering edge of, are we going to lose them? No, we want to keep them within our building. Right? And the last thing is our enrolling support blocks. At the beginning of this year, we had all of our students in their classes. And then after Thanksgiving, after we had some time for our case managers to go and work with teachers, get to know our students, we were able to create some support blocks for those students as well.
Okay, so I just want to go back. If you look at our triangle again, the first 2 layers on there, the in-class supports and the in-reach, are layers that we've added to the bottom of our triangle. So the other support blocks were there before. That's when kids were out getting a block of support. LEAP is a program for the more high-functioning non-grad students, and then our skills program. So we're just sort of adding on 2 additional layers below, but we're also no longer streaming, so the inclusion or the differentiation in classrooms is really wide, which had some challenges and still does. We're still working on that one. So for taking action, obviously last year I did the scan, we kind of looked at it, and then I sat down with the student support team and just said, how can we do this a little bit better? How can we capitalize on what we have in the building? And so we had some discussions and came up with the new model. Then we presented at the April staff meeting. The staff were not very happy because we had really flipped the whole model on its head, and I had to have a lot of follow-up conversations. And it's a big shift for teachers to have those kids in their classrooms all of a sudden, where formerly they were someone else's problem or someone else's job to work with. So just having a really inclusive team and trying to get that you know, I guess that shift in perception that they're all our kids and we all need to take responsibility for them was a big shift for staff. But May, June, we made some decisions and went ahead with staffing. And then this year's been really great. We started with a new model. Everybody knew it was coming. And we've been working at it as a really collaborative team. So what's working, what's not working, how do we work these processes, how do we get referrals, how do we get support for kids. And it's been a really, really great collaborative journey, which I'm really excited about. So the end of the first semester, we just had a meeting with all our grade 8 teachers and just who's falling through the cracks, and now we still have time and the resources to do some more cushion support in those classrooms. So that's really exciting. And semester 2, we still have some learning to do. So we're going to be really working on teaching all of our staff, EAs included, on what good Tier 1 adaptations, like, you know, your classroom, the environmental situation is fantastic, right? We need more of that. So we need to do some learning with our staff.
So we wanted to bring in some voice from other teachers within our building. So we just have a short video.
Oh no, where did it go? Oh, here we go. We need speakers. Can you turn it up?
After we gave the NLPS reading assessment,
Pause it.
we entered all of...
Okay.
Oops.
Uh-oh.
Sorry. It should be up now.
It should be up?
Yeah, but it turns out there.
No.
Okay. Here's some of our teacher voice.
After we gave the NLPS reading assessment, we entered all of that data into EduData, and we analyzed that data. We broke it down and looked at the percentages of students that were not meeting expectations or were below emerging, those students that were at the proficient level, exceeding, and so on. We then invited the rest of the staff to go into...
Can we use that mic?
If I have my glasses on. Which way is it? I'll take a picture of your face and then put it in the dictionary. Try it again. Okay.
EduData look at their individual class lists of their students, and from there seek out support for those students.
So the new inclusion support model has been really helpful in my classroom because
I thought that was it.
Yeah, can we just leave the microphone open?
We have one here, but it doesn't really work.
No, like what about one of the Trustee Comments?
It's through the system that it's live.
That's the same one.
We could try the,
We try it. Yeah, try it.
let's go to speakers.
those ones are just, I don't know if they'll work, but we can try it.
Let's try it.
It is now.
Oh, it's on now.
Hello? Does that help?
That will be.
No, for us,
just
for the public.
Yeah, the internet.
We can hear it, okay.
Yeah, I can.
I feel bad.
I've been able to get specific help in for the students who need it the most. With a class of 22, 24, 28 students, it's really hard to consistently give the in-depth one-on-one help that a lot of these students need. And that's when inclusion support came in, and they were already trained teachers. They were already very knowledgeable in the subject area, so I didn't have to do any explaining on that. They could get right to work with the students, and we've seen drastic improvement in a lot of the kids. I've had inclusion support in a variety of grades, and I cannot say enough good things about the support that I've gotten.
I've found it's really been helpful for some of the struggling students to have access to more adults in the building so that they can build relationships with them and just really having one more person that they can touch base with. It's been a good opportunity to for collaboration. We've been able to get together, put our heads together when I have problems, and been given really good suggestions. For example, learning how to differentiate assignments for different types of learners. It's also been really helpful for struggling students to have access to more one-on-one time, which has really been able to help them boost their skills and fill in some of the gaps that they've missed.
So the new school support system at John Barsby is beneficial to Indigenous students for multiple reasons. A couple of the reasons, in my opinion, I think that Indigenous students are benefiting from the amount of services offered by various staff members in the school. And if we think about kind of how things worked last year, there was only a couple of students that worked with Indigenous people in the school, and I was one of them, a couple of EAs, and obviously there's other staff members that are helping, but now because of the model that we have in place, the Indigenous students are being exposed to more staff in the building, and it's benefiting them in tremendous ways.
The main benefit of having Skills for Life students join us in senior acting this semester was the diversity. We are quick to acknowledge that students learn a lot from working with people unlike themselves, whether that student is from another country, another culture, lives in a different part of the world. Bringing Skills for Life kids into the classroom is just another form of that diversity. When we give our students the opportunity to work with diversity, we're giving them the opportunity to develop adaptability. We're giving them the skills to be able to see the world outside of what they've been exposed to so far. Another great attribute or opportunity that our students get from having Skills for Life kids in senior acting class was the ability to explore and practice empathy. Just like any other soft skill, some of our students come in with it with a deficiency, and some of our students come in with it quite strong in the area. It's a wonderful thing to see a student discover their own sense of empathy and what it can bring to the classroom. The student, once they've engaged on that level with people who may benefit from their help, they enter a positive feedback loop where they begin to feel really good about themselves. They feel that they have a unique trait to offer, and that makes them feel more powerful.
The biggest differences between my former outreach program and the inReach program I'm currently working in are connections to the building. I'm now working with kids who are still connected to the building and actively engaged in developing relationships with them to keep them in school, to show them why they need to stay in school. Whereas when I was in the outreach program, I was working mostly with kids who had already lost that connection to school, and I was spending a lot of time fighting to get them back into the building and trying to give them reasons to get their education and to come back in. I'd say those are probably the biggest differences between the two programs.
I really enjoyed working as an inclusion support teacher, not just getting to know the students, and I see them in my classroom, but when I was doing the grade 8 electives, I got to see a student get so excited about a cartoon that she loved. I got to see them cook. I got to, what all the electives are in woodwork and drama. And so you see students in other ways where if you're just in your own classroom, all you do is teach your subject area. So I really enjoyed seeing the students in other areas. I really enjoyed seeing my colleagues, the other teachers in this building in other areas, that, boy, there's some really talented teachers in this building. And I'm in awe of the work that they do and how interesting their courses were. Personally, for me, it was excellent professional development because I get to go in somebody else's room and say, oh, that's a good idea, or that's a good way to manage a student. And I found it really helpful and beneficial to me as a teacher in many ways.
So sorry about the sound on that one. But that's some voices of our teachers, and we've really found that in this model, although it's not smooth sailing all the time, it's really had some great spillover in terms of breaking down those silos and giving teachers and students opportunities they'd never had before.
And so how do you build capacity? Do you start with structure and move on to culture and understandings, or do you flip that and do it the other way around? We decided to start with structure, and we put systems in place that made it easy for teachers to access support for themselves and support for their students. But there's still a lot of work to do. We are really focusing on building that collaborative culture, and we're doing a lot of talking, a lot of planning with teachers. So as we're going into next year, we're giving them a lot of time to sit and come together and to plan, working on and continuing to evolve our grade 8 model. We know that we need to develop and train some staff in providing some tier 2 reading and math interventions to really help with the fluency of some students who are working significantly below grade level but are still on a grad path. And we're really working on the understandings of staff in the tier 1 interventions so that when the students are getting the pull-out support for their reading fluency, they can step then back into the classroom and participate in the learning experiences with the rest of their classes. But there needs to be a lot of teacher education about those tier 1 interventions, and so they can practice and apply them. And we really want to build that same collaborative culture between the support teachers and the classroom teachers, so that a classroom teacher feels very comfortable saying to a support teacher, come and sit beside me and help me plan this experience for my whole class in a way that supports the diversity and to have everybody be successful.
Okay. And that is it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See if anybody has any questions. Trustee Robinson.
From February scan to today, how do you, I almost swore, how do you, it seems they're buying it. What did you put in the Kool-Aid?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's just having the experience, and Teresa and Stephen both have it as well, of seeing another model. A lot of our staff have been in the building for a long time, and they haven't really had the fortunate experience to experience other models that we have. And I think it's just, it's student-centered. I think in their hearts, staff know that students need to be in the classroom and be experiencing that. So I think that's how.
Of ours.
Yeah.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to say, from a parent perspective, I really want to applaud you guys for having the courage to admit that it wasn't working and proactively do something about it. Because I think that really speaks very well to how our district is moving, and that we have administration that is willing to have those hard conversations. And I think it really benefits students because it shows them that you're learning too, and it's okay to make mistakes. Thank you.
Nicely said. Thank you. So I have to see others. I'll take this opportunity. I am fascinated by the last question that you proposed. posed, Teresa, which was like, how do you create structural change fundamentally? Actually, you said, how do we build capacity? And then you talked about that you guys decided to go the structure route and to put in systems, and then kind of go from that perspective. I think that alone is a really fascinating conversation. So I don't think we have time to have it now, but I think it's something we have a lot. This is a really great learning opportunity, and I think we have a lot to learn from your insights in this. And so if I can just kind of have you put some mental notes, of observing how this works, because I think that it's the process in and of itself is incredibly informative. So, and I want to give you this little piece back that I heard. Mr. Rokeby, comment, quote, "Wonderful to see a student discover their own sense of empathy." You did that. And you all did that. So I think that's a very beautiful thing. So I was quite stunned by that quote. So thank you very much. Don't know if anybody else has any questions, or perhaps Superintendent Sewell has a comment.
Well, perhaps,
Sometimes.
You guys feel it. Barsby seems like a school on the move. And so when you turn everything upside down and shake it and keep all the good things and change a whole bunch of other things, good things happen. So thank you for telling your story here tonight. And I think we can all learn a little bit from it. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Okay, so we were still
You guys are taking over.
Would you guys like to meet?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All of you but Dave?
Thank you. Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
First is that now we have to follow that stuff.
We'll do our best. So one of the things that we did, and it's one of the reasons why you've got some differences in some of the slides in your package from the presentation, is we put a call out to the system just saying, these are the things that we want to surface and celebrate and share this week. What kind of examples are out there? And things kept trickling in as late as this afternoon, and we just really felt we wanted to honor the work being done in schools, and we wanted, if somebody shared something they were excited about, we wanted a chance to add it in. So that's why you're seeing a few differences. So I'm going to just speak to a few school-wide approaches in terms of promoting safe, caring, and inclusive schools. This is just a little tiny peek into a few kinds of things that are happening. Speaking to that piece around school culture and community and collaboration, and bringing the whole community of people, students and staff, together. So one of them is at Gabriola. They have a thing that a phrase they say: try your best, get better each day. It's the Gabriola way. And they talk about what it means to be part of the Gabriola community. They do Monday gatherings, and they celebrate students, and this is how Mrs. Russell phrased it, who have exemplified and demonstrated a commitment to the core competency or value that is the focus that week. So if they are having a week where they're talking about being great problem solvers at their Monday gathering, they will celebrate some individual students and the things that they've done to show that. They also celebrate, accomplishments of teams. They have classroom projects that are really wonderful and special. They share as a community, but they build community by celebrating the really lovely things they're doing together. The picture from Hammond Bay on the left is their collection of house totems that they've got in their building. So they have used the Six Cedars framework, and they've created 6 houses around the animals that are part of that framework. And the teams are K to 7, multi-age teams. When you're in the school and you're right up close to those totem poles, what you actually see are little stickers that have come with the school photos, and all the children's faces of the team are on the pole, so they can kind of see who else is on their team. And they do multi-age activities, they do athletic things, they do craft things, they do STEM challenges, dress-up days. So some of it's academic, some of it's social-emotional learning, some of it's just having some fun as a community. But they collect points in those activities and challenge each other and celebrate their house teams. The example from Frank Ney is a little sliver of a bulletin board they put up this fall when they were trying to welcome some of their families to the school, and they took a look at all of the places in the world that the kids in their school have arrived to them from. They had 29 languages that they had to use to welcome their student body to the building in the fall. So they in noticing languages, they thought, okay, well, this isn't just about saying hello to somebody in a different language. This is about embracing all of the culture and diversity that is our school community. So they celebrate Chinese New Year and Ramadan and a lot of other holidays, and they do that by bringing parents and community members in and helping them build celebrations that aren't just sort of, somebody who's Googled up an idea about how to do Chinese New Year, but actually invite their Chinese Canadian families in to teach them some cultural practices and celebrations and really do things in an authentic and inclusive way. I'm also hearing that they just do lots of things like Google Translate's kind of alive and well in a bunch of classrooms, and they find a way to communicate with each other even when some of the learners in the room aren't speaking a lot of English. So what Ms. Poulin said to me in her email is, we just do what it takes to ensure everyone has their voice whenever and wherever possible. So the last example up there is Mountain View. So their Abadier Donna Manson worked with them. She taught them about the number 4 being really important as part of the 4 stages of life, the 4 seasons, 4 directions, 4 elements, and the focus on mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional selves. And they worked collaboratively. So that picture is a picture of the grade 6 and 7 drum, but they had kids put in designs and collaborate. So every drum that they made, they had one for kind of, every couple of grades had a drum that they made last year, but none of the designs was one child's on their own. They had a number of people contribute, and then they collaborated that into one image and worked as a community to figure out what they wanted on their drums. So those are just a few examples of school-wide initiatives that were really intentionally planned around building inclusive, safe, caring communities in their buildings. So we collected a few examples of a few other things. The question was posed earlier, how are we building capacity around this stuff in our schools? So we spoke of a couple of things. We'll just touch on a couple of other ones. The Learning Services Appreciative Inquiry Review is a process that started last year. I think I mentioned it last time I was in a meeting, but we started, Dr. Esselger last year got a group of us together, and we started looking at the data that was around in terms of our student success rates and some of the referrals around behavioral supports and things like that, and some of the data that's in the How Are We Doing report that we'll hear about later tonight. And we just kind of took a look at how things were going, and then put that against how our support models were looking in our schools and the initiatives and structuring with staff and things. Are we doing what we can be doing for all of our kids in terms of the supports for Tier 2 and 3 needs, and what does that look like? So, sorry?
I'm just going to put myself on the list.
Oh, okay. Okay. So where that's at now is we have a literature review that was completed that kind of illustrates the best practices and promising things that are happening in the field of student support. And we have close to a draft review of the initial kind of results of our dialogue. Really what it did was point us to more inquiry, and we're going to keep asking some questions and going deeper with things, but we're really excited about the conversation that is surfacing, and it's leading us to bring some people together and do some really deliberate focused work in some specific areas. Another one we spoke of with the Elementary Dig series, so that's the Elementary Inclusion series I referenced earlier. The Life Skills Forum is one that is just about ready to launch, so we are bringing together the teachers in the secondary skills classrooms, our 2 district skills programs, administrators from each of those sites as well, and the intent to be really looking thoughtfully at these programs. I mean, they are Tier 3 support environments where kids are spending the bulk of their time somewhere other than a kind of typical classroom setting, and we want to make sure that we really understand when we're making those decisions, why we're making those decisions, what would be the criteria for being placed in one of those classrooms. How do we know when you've built the skills and capacities you need and might be able to go into less restrictive settings? What does all that look like? So the first meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, but that is a series that will be ongoing with that team. And then I've just got a couple of little ones to mention, and then I'll pass it over to Margaret for some secondary stuff. Quam Quam School, we have a really beautiful collaboration that's just launching. Our learning coordinators are wrapping around the team there. It's a pretty unique and special place, but that comes with unique and special challenges sometimes. We're really learning a lot about that group of kids and that community of people, and how we can support them and what we can learn from them about this beautiful thing they're creating out there. So we have some deliberate partnerships between our learning coordinators, our inclusion support coordinators, and the staff at the school, just trying to figure out how we can learn and grow together and really do a good job for the kids that are at that site. And then the last one I'll speak to is our inclusion support team. That's a team that I spend lots of time with. We have a thing we call triage every Monday morning. Referrals have come in from across the system. Typically what that's about is if a school-based team feels that they have exhausted all of the resources and tools in their toolkit to provide support for a student, they reach out to inclusion support, and one of the coordinators will go and do some observations and work with the school team. The coordinators have a pretty unique background. One of them is an occupational therapist, one is a behavior analyst, and then one is just a super experienced life skills teacher. And they have 2 EAs with specialized training in behavioral supports and data analysis. And so they are doing some really beautiful capacity building. And the lovely thing about them is they can go right into the school, come right alongside the team, get to know the learner, really understand what's happening. Inclusion support will help, the coordinators will help them create. There's a whole bunch of stuff: behavior support plans, integration plans, de-escalation protocols, elopement protocols for some of our runners, just really understanding how we can help. And then as they fade their pieces out, often our inclusion support EAs will come in and stay for a couple of weeks and work right alongside the EA or the team in the classroom that's supporting the students, and just make sure the thing we wrote on the plan looks like the thing we're doing for the student at school through the day. And there's a really lovely ebb and flow between that team and the school teams. And we've seen some really exciting shifts and adjustments and layers added as a result of their work.
We already spoke a little bit about the secondary inclusion series, so I won't touch on that again. But the other 2 pieces that I would like to speak to are more along the building capacity aspect of ensuring that we have safe, caring schools. Our counselors and CYSFWs, I have to say it slowly because I always want to take a couple letters out of there, are doing some amazing work. Our counselors meet once a month at elementary school, and that's been an ongoing process that they've engaged in, but our secondary counselors are now coming together for the first time in 10 years to work on how do we speak to parents about the new curriculum? How do we support children as they move on to university and have all the questions they have? We know that anxiety is going through the roof. What kind of proactive things can we do in our classes to reduce some of the anxieties, to build children that have more resilience? Our CYSFWs, well, I'm going to have to read because there's so many of them. Some of the programs that they're using are Roots of Empathy, Mind Up, Erase, Brave Buddies, Brain Boosters, Ease Training. We have Natalie Chelston, who's been recently trained in it and providing training for additional people in the district. Talking Circles, Connect Parenting. There's a program that's starting in McGirr this month that is attachment-based, and hopefully we'll get enough parents to run it, but we have a bit of a coup. We had, in speaking with the provincial coordinator on Friday of last week, they've agreed to come over in the fall and train all of our CYSFWs. So we're really excited about that. Zones regulation, motivational interviews. Lynn has worked closely with her staff to ensure they have the skills to participate in motivational interviews and come alongside administrators to have conversations with children about why they do the things they do and just help them develop, a little bit more empathy, because we know that just like learning how to read, children learning how to behave in a proactive, pro-social way doesn't always come naturally, and they don't always learn it the first time. Safe Schools Advanced Training at the end of March. We have a 2-day training. Those are for more of our extreme situations where we have to really dig down deep and see if children are safe in the schools, if somebody presents a threat. And it's extremely important. We don't use it very often, but it's something we absolutely have to do. And the last one, gang reduction through informed practice. It's quite interesting. When we had the presenters come and talk to us about what that would look like, we learned a great deal about how young children start to become embedded in gangs and what some of the warning signs are and some of the things we can do to help stave off that movement that way. Hey, you're almost up. So when we talk about educative, preventive, and restorative approaches, we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the hard work that has come before us. Dr. Essinger has been a province leader on ensuring that we put structures in place in our APs around inclusive classrooms, restorative, preventative values that move away from being punitive. And our senior staff has been working on this for years. And so some of the things that we're doing now are just building upon it. Every school in School District 68 has this language in their code of conduct, and all administrators have had some training and continued training on how to facilitate restorative approaches when dealing with children who don't necessarily behave the way we want them to, nor the way the parents want them to. And that teaching pro-social behavior is just something people do every single day. It's what we do. We teach reading, we teach writing, and we teach behavior. And then the last thing I'd like to touch on is every school in the district is learning a little bit more and will continue to learn more about how trauma impacts behavior and learning, and that what one child can handle is not what another child can handle. And when children are in a fight, flight, or freeze situation, you should stop talking. And those are all skills that don't come naturally to educators, and we all need to learn a little bit more about it. Mr. Travers.
Okay, one more slide before Mr. Travers.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. It's a quick one though. So, a little bit earlier we talked about some school-wide initiatives that schools are undertaking to build culture and community. The other thing that we see happening at schools is a response to a specific need that they identify. They have a population of students who is extra vulnerable or having a little bit more difficulty doing some of the things that we would really like to see for them to have to be as successful as they can be. So I just grabbed a couple of quick examples. I don't know where the text went from under those, but let me describe two of them. So the one on the left is a picture of some girls in the ARROW program at NDSS. So ARROW is a reclaiming of resilience, opportunity, and wisdom. And so this was a concern for some of their grade 8 girls who just really weren't feeling connected. And Joe, I know you probably know more about this program than I do, so if I miss a piece, let me know. But what I was told by Ms. Bartlett was that the program allows students more flexibility in their learning while focusing on building relationships, improving mental health, and preparing them for life beyond the walls of the school building. The ARROW program is currently building a focus around land-based learning. So they looked at a group of girls that they just really felt needed a deep connection to each other, to the school, to the land, and they want to really anchor them with a really solid foundation early in their high school journey so they can have as much success as possible. The Men of Excellence initiative comes from Ladysmith Intermediate School. So Ladysmith Intermediate has a really robust community football program. And I learned last year that some of the boys in that program they have such a vibrant sense of community and identity with that team that we really were struggling to connect them to the school community and have them identify as a learner at Ladysmith Intermediate. It's not a puzzle that I really solved last year. I thought about it a lot. Mr. Jelks came up with a really unique solution this fall, and he's super excited about it. So they've created this club they call Men of Excellence. It's open to boys from grade 4 to 7. Any boys in the school who were interested in joining the club were welcome to join it. They meet after school once a week for an hour. The first time they met, they had 20 kids. When they met this week, they had 35, and it's only week 3. And what they're doing is they are inviting the mayor, people from the Chamber of Commerce, an RCMP officer, men in the community who have leadership roles and can talk to the boys about what being a leader is all about. They get together and just kind of celebrate that stuff together once a week. And I'm told that at the end of the initiative, which will be later this spring, they're all going to just, super dress up and come in for a really nice sit-down dinner with their parents and celebrate the end of the year. So it's just... it's tapping into their leadership qualities and abilities a different way, and it's really speaking to that group of kids. So it was kind of a lovely example of focusing on something. Other schools, there's lots of boys and girls clubs and friendship groups, recess guardians, where we've got students out on the playground being leaders and teaching things to younger kids. Even just some of the breakfast programs that welcome kids in. It's all an attempt to reach some of the kids that are not captured with the other things going on in the school. Thought goes into what additional support or additional opportunity can we create. Now we're ready to talk to Mr. Travers.
All right.
Uh-oh, but it didn't go.
No, not quite.
Oh, that's because these are sliding in. Why are they sliding in? All right, there we go.
So before Dave comes up, I just want to acknowledge just a little bit about my own experience around working in high schools and the shifts I've seen. And it's exciting shifts. I mean, punitive ways of dealing with misconduct were always the go-to. We would send a child home, they'd be out of the school, be out of teacher's hair, they'd come back, and very little learning would happen. And so Dave is here to talk a little bit about his culture of restorative practices, but I want to just draw your attention to the little post-it there with the stats on suspensions. They're going down because we don't see as much value as we once did in sending somebody away from the learning environment to do learning about their behavior in absence of being with an adult to guide them. So that's a big shift for us. There's some other stats I was looking at, and I didn't bring them tonight, but they're quite fascinating. When I looked at a 10-year period from the beginning of 2000 to 2010, both at elementary school and at secondary school, suspensions related to assaults were down by more than 50%. So I think sometimes we think that our schools are very, very dangerous because the media tells us every time something happens, but that's not what we see when we look at our statistics. But to go back to something more positive than fights, Dave.
Are you sure?
Yeah, come on up, Dave.
All right, well, it's a good thing because in 11 minutes it's my bedtime, so I'm not going to be that long. So NFPA, Dave Travers, I am the principal of Ladysmith Secondary, and I am a huge advocate for restorative practice. And I really believe that restorative practice is creating safe, caring schools in this district. About, as mentioned, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, Bob Esslinger went and said to principals, you need to put 3 key words in your code of conduct, and that is educative, preventative, and restorative. And I live by those words and use those words daily in my school. What I want to do is I want to kind of embrace the idea of a Coast Salish way, and what a Coast Salish way, if they wanted to explain something, is that they would tell it in a story. So I am going to tell you a story about a restorative practice. It didn't occur at Ladysmith Secondary, but it occurred when I was principal of Gabriel Elementary. When I was principal, I taught part-time a grade 6-7 class, and I had a teaching partner. And one day my teaching partner brought to me a picture of some that she had received from some of her students through Google Classroom. It was accidentally sent there and they saw it. And it showed, they had found pictures of myself from the internet and that teacher, and they had photoshopped it so that they had put a Ku Klux Klan hat, swastikas, and showed us with guns. Well, it was quite disturbing, and so one of the things we did, as was mentioned, we have VITRA training, and we looked at it and we said, was this a threat? So we went and we went through the paperwork to see if it was. We talked and we with the local RCMP, and we determined, no, this did not meet the criteria of a threat, but we still wanted to take it very serious. So I sat down with my team and we said, well, what are we going to do to deal with this behavior? Well, one of the ideas that was presented was pretty much at the end of a grade 7 class, you go on an overnight field trip. Well, we had decided, you know what, why don't we take that away from them, okay? And so we thought, okay, I said, well, you know what, this is kind of a big deal to do this. Why don't we take some time and think about that decision? So on my drive home, I, using hands-free, I phoned my buddy principal and I explained the situation to him. And he came back and he said, by taking away their year-end field trip, is that restoring the relationship? And at that moment, I realized something went off in my head and I said, no, it's not. He says, well, then you can't do that. So we met back the next day with the team and we gathered around and we said, okay, we're going to try this approach. And the approach that we went with was we were going to meet with the students and their families. There were 3 students in this case, so we're going to have 3 separate meetings. And we were going to give the students 4 questions ahead of time.
And the 4 questions were, what happened? What have you thought about since? Who was involved, or who does this affect? And how could you restore the relationship? Now, we gave those questions to the students ahead of time because we wanted to avoid the opportunity of a student saying, I don't know, okay? We wanted them to think about it. So we had 3 separate meetings and we worked through those questions. Well, one of the toughest questions that came up was, how can we restore this relationship? And it is probably one of the tougher questions that you come when you deal with restorative measures. So we actually sat down with the students, and this time we didn't do it with the families. We were going to let the families know what the outcome was going to be. But we sat down with the teacher, myself, and the 3 students, and we decided that a letter of apology is what would work for the teacher, but for me, because I was the principal and I represent the school, what could we do to give back to the school? We decided, and I don't know if you've been in an elementary playground lately, but there's a lot of pea gravel, and pea gravel gets thrown out of the playground and lands all over the place on the blacktop. And so we said, it was near the end of the year, why don't we clean that up? So for 3 lunch hours in a row, I worked with these students, and what we did during that time is we talked about things we were interested in, we laughed, we got to know each other, and we demonstrated to the entire school that these, because they knew that something had gone wrong, but they saw there was action, okay? And it was kind of interesting because probably about 2 or 3 days after making this decision that this was how we were going to deal with it, I had an individual come up to me and said, you know what, you made the wrong decision. You should have taken away their grade 7 field trip. They actually said, Travers, you are weak, okay? And I said, well, let's look at it, let me give you a little example. You punch me in the face, I punch you in the face. That's the way society looks at things because it's punishment. But what if I told you a better way that would be more effective? You punched me in the face, now you figure out how you're going to restore that relationship. And that is what restorative practice is all about. You know, we spend a lot of time in schools right now working to change the perspective of all our students around Aboriginal people. And I believe that we're getting there. There's some amazing things. I walk down my halls in Ladysmith and I hear from one classroom to the next talking about changes around Aboriginal people. But with restorative practice that we're doing, I believe by teaching that in schools that we are going to change society to shift from being punitive to being restorative. And so I know that there's examples, and it was introduced by Margaret, that I was going to tell how the culture of Ladysmith is changing. And you know what? I have no problem. I will sit down and buy anyone a burger in this room and have a conversation about how we are shifting our perspectives in Ladysmith from being punitive to a way of restoring relationship. So that is my story. So there you go. Yeah, it is. I'm getting a little shaky here. Do you have any questions or? So there's so many examples. I've used, just recently I used an example where I actually contacted maintenance and worked with Kristen Hovenberg, that's how it's said, and said, hey, you know, some students did some vandalism. How could is there a maintenance worker that would be willing to work with the students so they could see how this changes? So this just goes beyond the school. It like the district is thinking in this perspective too.
I know I have a question, but Trustee O'Neill does as well.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, it's a comment and it's a thank you. I learned through stories, and I really appreciate you telling us this great story tonight because I took away a lot. Thank you.
And Trustee Higginson, was that an indication of a question?
Yes, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest. There is a lot of information that's just been presented to us in a a short period of time, and I'm deeply appreciative for all of the information that we've been given, and most importantly, all the efforts that's going into building, the restorative environment that Mr. Travers just talked about, and hearing the story at Barsby. So, here's my question, and I hope that it doesn't seem like I'm not appreciative of all the information that we've just been given, but what I'm trying to figure out is what we are doing. We just got so much information and so many different examples of here's what's happening in one school, another school, and here's a great story from this school, and I think that's great. But what are we doing to ensure that there is, a basic level of programming around this issue happening across every school in the district, and more importantly, from a board level, in our 1,000-foot level, what are we doing to ensure that we set each school up for successful implementation of these practices?
So I think a big piece of it is some of the stuff that we talked about tonight, in the sense that there is an expectation that every school is looking at the classroom level, at the school level, connecting with the district conversation, and just understanding that this living and breathing preventative, educative, restorative thing is a living and breathing thing, that it is talked about in our schools, that it is attended to and nurtured. It is kind of everything. Like, it's every referral to the office when a child's had a problem outside and gets sent in to talk to administrator. It's when peers have conflict in the classroom and the way that the teachers interact with them in that moment and problem solve things. It's the really big incidents where we work with our liaison officers to bring in somebody to help with a really formal restorative circle. I think it's just a really clearly stated expectation and a clearly expressed expectation that we don't just kind of say these words, but we really do it differently. We really don't send kids home. Our suspension policy is really clear. We are not firing kids out our doors to go fix stuff all by themselves. We want them with us, where we can coach them and work with them and help them build those connections and things with peers.
The other piece is, as people learn more about how trauma impacts a child's ability to regulate, they become more aware of how they need to do some of the things that Steve Daley talked about, setting up the environment, ensuring that they have the tools they need in the classroom to be regulated, and recognizing as the student comes in, it may not be, that child might be coming in a different way than they did the day before, and how you manage that. Those are skills that we're working on, building capacity with our principals and our teachers. Most recently, we will be working on how to have those restorative conversations, and our principals will be teaching other principals on how to have that dialogue, who will then teach the teachers as well. So we're not there yet, but we are certainly working on it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, if I could maybe just clarify, because you touched on something I think that's important. We are sending some principals to the Crisis and Trauma Response Institute to learn about restorative practices and how to have those dialogues in school, and they'll come back and they'll teach other principals and vice principals how to do the same. And that's happening in the very near future.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Trustee Higginson, the question was posed to you, did that answer that question, your question?
I mean, it did. I guess I appreciate that we're talking about, that this is an expectation, and I think that's, clear, and I think that's an excellent expectation, and I really believe in our, in our code of conduct and the way we are framing it and going about it. But, and I'm glad to hear that we're sending principals to the Crisis and Trauma Response Institute. I'm just wondering as well then, if we are, going back to that question about what we're doing to ensure that we set each school up for success. I'm glad that it is an expectation, but beyond just making it an expectation, what are we doing to ensure that we are providing the right environment for this to be successful for our principals and vice principals to implement in their schools?
We are also, that example of sending people to the Institute for Training is one example of a number of things that we're really trying to do with everybody. So we do have, EASE training is going in, our mental health framework that's coming along is, the intent is, if we're going to build capacity, we're not doing it with one or two people at one or two schools. That's what these district gatherings are about, is delivering the same message to big teams at the same time, delivering our expectations. That Tier 1 matrix we talked about earlier is a really good example where some really thoughtful people thinking about how they're going to implement this list of opportunities and expectations in their school. We put the word expectation at the top, and we had some questions about that, right? Like, what if this triggers people or worries them a little bit because they're not doing it yet? And I said, yeah, that was a really deliberate choice to put that on there to provoke really specific conversation around what we're supposed to be doing. But I agree that throwing that word out there without the foundation underneath it to support the resources and capacity building and understanding doesn't work. And so that's what some of these big gatherings are about too, is bringing big groups of people together to talk about it at the same time, always with the understanding that they're taking it back to their teams at school and broadening that work. Are there any other pieces that...
I would just add, and I kind of use this phrase with my staff a lot of time, I say, when new things are introduced, I say, we're just babies, right? And we're just learning like some of these steps and growing. So this is a very, atypical way of dealing with behavior, right? And it's just we need some time, right?
Ripples in the pond, right? We kind of plant the seeds and just keep growing the layers as we go.
And Trustee Kelly?
Thank you. So I think my questions have been answered, but if I may just say to Mr. Travers, I appreciated his story. One thing that really stuck with me is repairing relationships, right? And that's really important when we're talking about creating community in the school. Yeah. So I appreciate that, and that's a little tidbit that I'm taking away from the presentation. So thank you.
It's all about relationship, right? So, good, thanks.
And Trustee Brzezowicz.
Thank you. I have a question that sort of has two pieces to it, but the first part is you mentioned VITRA, which I know is violent threat, something assessment. What's GRIP, and what's the difference between VITRA and GRIP?
And GRIP is about gang, I'm going to look at the acronym, gang reduction through informed practice.
Okay.
So it's about learning about what are some of the warning signs, what do we know about what gangs look like in BC, because it's quite different than what we would traditionally see on television, where perhaps in an inner city, I'll use the US, they may be joining because they're in poverty and they have no outlook on how to be successful financially. In BC, it's quite different. It is very lucrative, and students that are being drawn into gangs are not the kids that we would think they would. So there's all sorts of aspects that we just we're quite ignorant about, and so that's why we're working with them.
And my second part then is, I guess in terms of VITRA specifically then, when you're doing restorative practice, one of the things that I know, and when I did some work on restorative practice, and I've barely touched the surface compared to what you all have done, but is that there are some cases where it's not appropriate because, in particular, what I was learning about was some of the perpetrator specifically might have there might be some underlying mental health issues, and how are we able to assess that and figure out if there's situations where we actually need an intervention that's stronger than or different than just a restorative practice because there's something underneath going on here, like I say, a mental health issue and trauma, and where this person actually needs some help too.
So we look at every case separately and distinctly and gather as much information. Part of the VITRA is you do speak with the families and learn about mental illness.
Okay.
And you take that into account. And there are situations where it's absolutely not appropriate to bring the victim together with the perpetrator because you're re-victimizing. Yeah. So it's complicated, and it isn't a one-size-fits-all, but at the end we want both people to leave with dignity and understanding that while the wrong has happened, we're going to move forward because we're a community.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm on this list here. Mr. Travers, what I appreciate about your story is that, I mean, you displayed the tenets of restorative justice, right? You have a relationship that you've developed. If there's an incident, you look at the incident and efforts to restore, you agree upon an outcome, and then you follow up on that outcome that's meant to be the restorative process. So I appreciate your kind of exemplary behaviors and story to kind of give us how the practice should look. I share Trustee Higginson's concerns about lack of consistency across all schools, and so maybe not everyone is exceptionally skilled or understands fully the tenets the way that you displayed. And so one thing that I'm wondering is that, and given, you know, I keep hearing we're not there yet, I've heard that a number of different times. So I'm wondering, like, this is aspirational and this is where we're going to go, and I understand the research to support it, so I understand that the direction is good. But since we're not there yet, what are we doing in the meantime? Do we have a hybrid model? I know that sometimes that's a transitionary way of adjusting to when you're moving to a restorative practice, that you have a hybrid model, that you engage in some more traditional methods as well as restorative methods when appropriate, or you know, what is it that we're doing in the meantime? Because what I'm hearing, for example, would be kids are learning that that you can just get away with anything because there's no repercussions. And so that's what I'm hearing at an elementary level, is that there's no repercussions, there's no outcomes, so all the kids just get away with it, so everybody just keeps doing it. So I'm wondering if you could tell me what we do in the situations where we don't have someone as skilled as Mr. Travers here, or we don't quite have the system set up yet.
I think there's different systems set up in some ways, and there's lots of restorative approaches that may not follow the tenets of a restorative justice protocol kind of in the same order, but certainly the intent is the same, right? The intent is about repairing relationship and figuring out how to reconnect to, you know, the people that you've wronged or what's going on there. And the positive behavior intervention support, PBIS stuff, is alive and well in the district still, so lots of schools have really well-developed behavior matrix with really clearly state expectations in different environments and the ways that they're going to interact, you know, kids are going to interact with each other and with adults. Those are used as a point of reference when problem solving is occurring. They've been co-constructed in many schools between the staff and the kids together, so, you know, as kids are walking down the hallway, if the matrix is sitting there and there's something they need to reference, they can pull it right out and say, oh, remember, in the hallway we walk with, you know, calmness and quiet voices, and we built that together, so let's make sure that we're doing those things. So I think there is accountability, but I think we will continue to have dialogue about the difference between restoring a relationship and understanding and learning and building the capacities you need, and just getting a really big punishment for doing something wrong, right?
Well, and I'd like to add to that, because it's not one or the other. There may be situations where it's just like teaching a child to read or a baby learning to walk. It happens at different speeds and different timelines, and we don't just decide, boom, you're going to know what we're teaching you immediately. So sometimes there's situations that when you're looking for something bridging, it might be co-regulating. So maybe that child will be, while they're learning to manage on the playground in a socially acceptable way, maybe there's an EA that's 5 feet away, or they walk with the principal, or they have a different, maybe their recess is, instead of being with the primary children, it might be with the intermediate children. There's a variety of things that happen in schools that don't just rely on, okay, we've had this circle, we've talked about harm, we've put together a plan, and then move away from it, because it often, just like anything else, we have to go back to it and go back to it. My husband still doesn't wash the stove. We've been at it for 25 years. You know, it's not restored yet, that relationship.
And yeah, I think, you know, what Margaret touched on, a really good example. Kids take, you know, 10, 12 years to learn how to read. And there's just such a level of different skills that they need in order to be able to do that. And it's the same thing with behavior. Students don't, from my experience, very few students see that when they're sitting in a detention, see that correction, maybe in a short term. Restorative practices take a long time. That's probably one of the trickiest things about them, is that it's not a quick fix solution. So yeah, it takes a long time. I like the saying, you know, there's that famous kindergarten thing that says, everything I need to learn in life, I learned in kindergarten. I think that person got it wrong. I think it's everything that you're supposed to learn in life, you saw in kindergarten, and you took the rest of your life to learn, right? And that's where I think we're at, right? So.
I think one other piece too, reflecting on some of the additional layers of inquiry that we're talking about with this Learning Services Appreciative Review that we were doing, and one of the things that I think we have a disconnect between sometimes is just really communicating thoroughly with our parent community about what these practices are and what they look like. I've been part of dialogue in some cases where I think the children involved in the circle, and we've had the conversation, and we've really done some great planning around how we're going to restore things at school. And if you ask the kids how that went, they can feel it. They know that they've learned something. They know they have a plan for next time. We've got a system and a structure at school that's attending to it. But their parents have come from a place where they would have been suspended or asked to work in the office the next day or sent home from school. And so I think sometimes the work is happening at the schools and it actually is in place, but it's hard to communicate that to people who that wasn't their lived experience in school. And I think we've got some work to do just building those bridges and that piece of communication. And there is a group of people working on how can we do that in a deeper way and really be thoughtful about what we're sharing with our families and bringing them into the dialogue with us, because I think sometimes our parents watch it from the outside a little bit, and it's really challenging to convey the whole big picture of all of those layers without having experienced it.
And suspensions, it's true, we may still have suspensions, but very few of them that a student would leave the school. One of the things, an in-school suspension in my school is actually a pretty good thing, because they spend the day with me and I build relationship with them so that I get an ally, so that maybe the next time when they're out doing about it, they think about, yeah, this person's actually a human that cares about me. And we see that change. So,
Trustee Graham, you have a question for?
No, thanks very much. I appreciate the presentation.
We have just a couple more very quick slides, but we recognize we really monopolize a lot of time.
Yeah, I think we can show them. We can do them super quickly.
We'll do them very quickly.
We just wanted to pick a couple of threads out of the student learning survey. One of the things that we learned about the data when we looked at it, we are at or above the provincial average with quite a few of the areas related to social emotional learning and behavior and the things. So we just picked out three slides. At school, I'm learning to understand and support human rights and human diversity. For example, differences in culture, gender, physical, or mental ability. So the column on the far right are students who feel positive about that experience, and we've seen that grow.
Thank you.
We've seen that grow each of the last 3 years with the survey. A second question, at school I'm learning to solve problems in peaceful ways. Again, we see an upward trend, so we pulled out the data from our grade 7s and 12s just because that question showed up 3 years running on both of those surveys, and we see that kids are feeling better about that. The third one we pulled out, at school, rules and expectations for behavior are clear. For example, school rules or code of conduct. And that's another one that we've seen over the last 3 years. Every year, our kids have felt a little bit more confident that they understand those things, and we are ahead of the provincial average on the scales for those as well.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you for a second to make sure we understand this? Are these slides 2016 when they were in grade 7?
So, no, so these would be the grade 7s who filled it out in 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah, so it's the 17, 18, 18, 19 school years. So those 7s would have been in grade 10.
One of the challenges we had, the questions aren't exactly the same every year, so it was difficult to find linear data that would...
And they don't do the survey every year either, so that also complicates it a bit. Yeah. But we did, we tried to pull out some relevant questions and take a peek, so.
Trustee Higginson, you had a question?
Yeah, just a quick one. I know I've asked a lot tonight, so I will make this one quick. There was a talk just recently, I think, Ms. Daley, you were talking about, a lot of this has to do with communicating with the parent community. So I'm wondering what resources are available for, PACs or parents in schools who feel like their school is struggling with this. What kind of resources for PACs who want to bring in speakers or people around the culture of the school, what kind of resources are available for them?
That's something that I think, we do have, our principals really are, well-versed in this stuff and are happy to speak at PAC meetings and things. In terms of speakers and things coming in, that's something that we probably would need a little bit of time to pull together for you, to be thoughtful about who we might recommend.
Okay.
And that's it for us.
Yeah, we're at the same ending slide that bars we had an hour and a half ago.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Jessica?
Yes.
So I'm not there because I have the flu, and I am circling the drain here, so I'm going to hang up now.
Okay.
With much regret for not being able to participate.
Krista.
Thanks, everyone.
I know I'm
Thanks. Did you hang up? Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks to my colleagues from earlier, too. I have been quite far removed from classrooms for the last decade or more, and so I'm always thankful to watch how our profession has continued to learn and how our students have continued to teach us over the years to become better. So I too enjoy those stories about simple moments with students that help us learn and help us become better. This presentation tonight is about one of the many reports that come from the Ministry of Education. There used to be in excess of 1,100 PDF reports produced by the Ministry of Education each year. This is one of the ones that continues to be presented by the Ministry, released partway through the year, and it contains data from previous years. So this is the most recent How Are We Doing report on performance across the province, but in this case our school district, on how students of Indigenous ancestry are doing. So this report started to be presented in the mid-1990s. British Columbia is still the only province and territory in Canada that produces a comprehensive report on the academic indicators for Indigenous students. We have been very lucky over the years to have the agreement of Indigenous leadership across the province give the nod to being able to collect data that says I am of Indigenous ancestry when we collect it as part of our 1701 data collection process. And because of that, from the mid-1990s, we've been able to track how well our education does in the service of Indigenous students and their families. And we continue to be the only province and territory that does that. The ministry produces a provincial report, and it also produces the same report for each school district in the province. The report for the province comes out at the end of November. That was an agreement between First Nations Education Steering Committee and the Ministry of Education. And then our district reports come to me and each district in an unmasked form, which means it has personal information in it that we can track. And then it's released in a masked form in December. So it keeps getting later each year, and I'm not sure why that is, but I'm guessing it's because of the comprehensive amount of data that the Ministry of Education collects, and then it has to go through a quality control process, and then it comes to us. So that was just a little bit of background on it. It's grown substantially over time. As each year there's new requests for people to, or for the ministry to include different pieces of data in it. And so much so, excuse me, so much so that yeah, wow, thanks Jamie. So much so that the ministry is moving away from PDF reports, and I'll show you some examples of the dashboards that they're providing for us now that are much more interactive than a PDF report. Thank you very much. Inside the report, there are demographics, and I was singing with Lawrence earlier this evening too, so that might be why my voice is the way it is. Inside the report there are demographics, there are indicators of enrollment numbers, there are comparisons to provincial rates, there are FSA scores, there are trends over time, there are grade to grade transition rates. So there's a variety of pieces in there. I'll explain about those trends over time as we go through. There's also what we call snapshot data. So it might appear to be that, oh, this happened this year, and this happened the next year, and this happened the next year, but it's different groups of students. So sometimes it's just here's what it looks like this year with no comparison to previous years. But I want you to keep in mind as we look through some of the data here, and as you look through the report itself, that it's not the same group of kids as a cohort has moved through, except for some specific ones, and I'll point them out to you too. I also want to let you know that a lot of it is what we refer to as tombstone data. It's data that is in the past. Right? It's the previous year's data that we receive 6 to 7 months after the events may have occurred. And so it's the trend over time data that's most informative for us. And you saw some of the examples from earlier presentations of data that's not tombstone. It's data that we act on. And we have that at our fingertips too. So I'm trying to put this report in the context of our greater data environment. And so some of the slides in here will show you examples of screenshots from other data tools that we have at our disposal. I'm happy to answer any of the high-level questions that come along too, Chair, so if you want to interrupt as we go through, I'm fine with that too. If we want to dive more into specific questions that you have, I'm happy to provide that in another session as well. So I'll just go through some of the highlights, and these are some of the things that caught my eye as I went through this quickly. So some of the highlights in the demographic section, quickly our enrollment of students who self-identify as a being of Indigenous ancestry. It's been pretty consistent over the years. It's about 18% of our total student population. You can see that we have a small number of students who are status First Nation on reserve attending our public schools. And so relative to our general students of Indigenous ancestry, you can see there's 224 there. And these are of last year's numbers. Right? So, and 2,380 are off reserve. You can see from those slides that one of the things that stands out for me is we have an increased enrollment of Indigenous students in alternate programs. So, like most of our data, these just drive our questions. So when I see something like that, I say, well, why is that? And I can have those questions with those students. I can go over there and sit down with them and ask them those questions. I can say, who is that? I can dive into our MyEd BC data, and I can find out exactly who those students are. We can have those questions with the system at large, or we can have a question specifically at Learning Alternatives, or we can trace back to where those students come from their schools, because we know who they are. Another question I would ask myself is that a pathway that helps that particular student graduate? And that might be yes or no. Right? So some of the reasons behind that. So my point is, for a graph like this, we don't look at it as that's a good thing or that's a bad thing. It's a thing, and it drives our questions. And we can dig deeper into that with data that we already have at our fingertips that's not as part of this report. The report also highlights some of our academic indicators, and I've chosen a few up here. Again, some of the things that drive our questions here. So we've got participation rates in our FSA scores. Last year, 58% grade 4 participation rate. So when we look at our FSA scores, we can say that, well, it's just over half of our students who would have written that. So if we're going to make decisions based on reading at grade 4, then we can't just rely on FSA data. We have to start looking at what data comes out of our schools. So we have data from focus schools. We have data that is based in our literacy screens. So we have other ways of accessing how our students are doing at grade 4. But this is a piece of the puzzle. Some of the things that stood out for me here is our grade 4 reading scores for meeting or on track are lower than we would like. So you can see that first one up in the left-hand side there. Emerging, on track, and extending. Emerging is blue. So that's not okay. So then we have to think, okay, is that accurate? And what's going on in grade 4? So grade 4 writing is on track. It's the highest yet. So you can see that in the middle. But participation rates are below 50% on that particular section of the FSA. So we use this type of data along with school data, other district data that we have to track the impact of our strategies. Some of them are large strategies like focus schools. Some of them are more intense like embedded literacy support in our schools. Some of them are focusing our coordinators to support schools directly on improving those results. This is an example of a cohort that travels over time, so we can look at this. This is one group of students who started in grade 8, and you can see them back there. There they are in that little orange dot. So our Aboriginal students are the blue line, and non-Indigenous students are the orange line. Our transition rates between grade 8 and grade 12 in this district for Indigenous students have historically been really high. So when I've looked and tracked them over the years, this school district stands out as transition rates. Most of the kids of Indigenous ancestry who start in grade 8 are still there in grade 12. So 97%, right? So it's a small group of students who's not there in grade 12 that started with us in grade 8. So this particular cohort, last year, grade 12, you can see that a higher percentage of Indigenous students made it to grade 12 than non-Indigenous students. I mean, it's a smaller number, but it's a higher percentage of that cohort that started. What stands out for us is that last drop. So the students who made it to grade 12, that last drop is the kids who received a Dogwood diploma in that year. So when we look at that data over time, I will compare that line to previous years, and I will see that line that goes down at the end for a Dogwood. I would see that it was at a more acute angle in previous years, and so it's risen up. I know everybody's looking at it and wants to dig into it a little bit. I'll also show you some other, as I say, some other screenshots that allow us to do that sort of thing. Another highlight that stood out for me is the completion rates. So this type of completion rate allows us to, or this document also disaggregates between boys and girls for some indicators. And so this disaggregation, I mean splitting out by gender, allows us to look at whether our strategies are working for both boys and girls. And you can look at previous years here and you can see where our boys' completion rate was 50% and our girls' completion rate was 64%. So what we were doing for boys might have been not working as well as it was for girls. So we take that into consideration when we're looking at what kind of strategies we can put in place to improve results and make sure that it's working for both boys and for girls. And you can see our last result there was 68 and 70%. That gap between boys and girls has closed significantly over the last number of years. One of the pieces that this document started to put in place was how are children in care doing over the years. So it was an addition over, I'm thinking it was in the last 5 years, this piece of data was put in place. So our past 5 years, you can see that our graduation rates there jump up and down dramatically, 33, 25, 60, 41, 92. And so, is it in the package?
Yeah, we're good, thank you.
Okay, good. And that's because of low populations. When we get into low populations, 2 to 3 and 4 students difference can really make it jump as part of our percentages. So we're conscious of when we're looking at results for particularly Indigenous students, on-reserve students, those are small numbers per cohort, and so they tend to fluctuate quite a bit. We have some strategies within data and analytics, like bundling 3 years together so that we can get a big enough number, and it tends to level out those trend lines. But for this, I'm pleased for this because we're able to take this data for children in care. Ms. Olson, Ms. Steele, myself, we sit down with representatives of our delegated authorities, Kwamut-Lalem. They have a list of students who are in care for Kwamut-Lalem. We are able to track those students individually. We know who they are, we know what grade they're in, we know what school they're in. We work with Kwamut-Lalem's staff to make sure that we all know who they are and the staff who are wrapped around each one of those students. We've just started that this year, so that's a growing relationship with Comet-Laleham. And so I would say more to come on that, on understanding who each one of those students is. We have an increasing use of MyEdBC, one of our large-scale data collection systems, to ensure that we know who all of those students are, and we're keeping them on a pathway to success. Another piece that's in there that's come over the last 2 years, and because it's come over the last 2 years, it hasn't formed a trend line yet, so it's new data. It's where do our students go when they leave us? Over the last number of years, the ministry has started to extend the use of personal education numbers for each student and track them into post-secondaries within British Columbia. So the data that you would see in the report itself is only 2 years old. It's familiar to us. We tend to know who our students are. We tend to know where they go, but it's nice to see the data being tracked like this. The data dashboard that I show you below there comes from a totally different tool that the ministry provides for us, but it looks at the same data, but it allows us to look over a long period. So it's a gigantic pivot table underneath this dashboard, but you can see on the right-hand side that I've chosen all from 2008 and 9. I can look back that far with this dashboard. I could just choose that year and see where all our students from that year went, but I chose all of them, so you can see the vast majority of Indigenous students who graduate from our schools here go to Vancouver Island University, which is not surprising, right? So we can track that down to students who left last year. We can say when did they go, after 5 years, after 6 years, after 7 years, after 8 years. So that's the type of data tool that we're being provided with now rather than a PDF. I can go in there, I can click down there and say, I just want to look at Indigenous girls who were ever in care by MCFD. Which universities did they go to or not? And we could track it at that fine a point. Another chunk that they put into this document is highlights from a student learning survey. So not all of it's in there. And I just grabbed a couple of graphs out of there, and I'm going to compare these graphs with the next slide as well so that you can see the quality of data that we look at compared to this report. So I grabbed a couple of graphs out of there and just put them in here. And so changes to the survey, as my colleagues mentioned earlier, sometimes have changed the questions that we can grab and bundle and look at. So these results are selected from questions in grade 3, or the questions through the student learning survey. We collect them for kids in grade 3-4, kids in grade 7, 10, and 12, and we don't ask them all the same questions. But these samples are from the grade 3-4 on the left and grade 12 on the right. We analyze the results from the student learning survey. I gather them in, I write a report, a short briefing note, some analysis, and we've just started on this path of looking at those more completely. I really like them because it's the one place that students can tell us as a district how we're doing on their behalf. It's their perspective, it's their point of view, and we can go, we thought we were doing great, and our kids are not agreeing with us. So what are we going to do about that? So we fold that into our data analysis meetings that we have here at the board office, and some of them are pertinent to schools, so schools get those reports for their local sites as well. Again, it's a valuable source of data that we've just started to mine, and I'm not sure how effective we are at it, but like everything else, we just get better the more that we take shots in it. This is a comparison with the same data. So before you had a static graph that you could look at with dots and try to figure it out. This is a student learning survey dashboard, and I just took two pieces out of it. So we've just started to work with that this year. It's been provided, I think December is when the ministry released it to us, so we can look at it. It looks at all of the student learning survey data, but it gives us an interactive tool on top of it. This dashboard is just one piece of it. So this allows us to interact directly with that data. It allows us to look for trends, areas of strength, areas requiring attention. So it's the type of data in this dashboard that shows Indigenous students in grade 7 compared to the province's result. And the question that this shows is, the answers to, do you feel welcome at your school? So Indigenous students, grade 7, do you feel welcome at your school? You can see on the left side, the province starts at 1% no response, 4% don't know. 15% are the negative answers to say at no time or never. The neutral is sometimes, and the positive is most times or all the time. So the one below it shows the percentage change in number of responses between 2017-18 and 18-19. So this is up there just to show you the level of detail that we can mine into this, and with the caution that we haven't done it to the extent that we will, because we've just received these dashboards for this one this year, and it's one of a number of dashboards that we can look at as well. So in a quick summary and a run through there, the report provides the data, drives our questions. It's summary data, it's tombstone data, it's part of a larger environment of data that we have at our fingertips, and the trend lines indicate to us that our students are being better served over the years, particularly Indigenous students. That's up, Christine.
Mr. Cadwallader, I'm not sure if anybody has any questions that could take 1 minute, but I think what we're going to have to do is have you come back so we can have an opportunity to ask you some questions, just given the time and that we have HR over there sitting quietly. But I don't know if anyone has a really quick... No? Okay, well, we're going to borrow you another time for your expertise. So thank you very much.
Can I leave that with you?
Yeah.
20 minutes. Is that good?
We go to 9.
What do we have this down to, this presentation?
Yeah, it should be down.
14. Perfect.
We'll be right on.
Thank you for being patient.
You just need to share it. Yeah.
When you're ready.
I don't need the computer, I'm going to have that. Are we ready? Good evening. Empathy, Colleen Gale, Senior Manager, Human Resources. Thank you for the opportunity to present the new Employee Standard of Conduct Administrative Procedure. It's going to be AP 428. We're extremely excited about the incorporation of this initiative to the district. I think it's important to start with why this procedure was developed. There's a lot of benefits, benefits for employees. It will provide guidance and understanding of the district expectations. I've heard the word expectations a lot tonight, so I'm going to speak to it now around employees. And the expectations will be consistently applied to all levels of employees within the district. So it's every employee category. Provides employees a clear outline of their fiduciary responsibilities. Employees will be reminded on a regular basis, because this will be reviewed annually with them, and over time will become a part of the culture of NLPS. Employer benefits. These standards in the AP reflect and align with the values of NLPS. They provide consistency throughout the entire organization. Managers can say with confidence that topics covered under this AP are the standard across the district. Ensuring due diligence around communicating expectations to all staff. For the unions, there's a clear understanding of the district standard and expectation, again, that applies to all employees in employee categories within the organization. It's consistency and equity for all employees that will shift and establish a work culture, and provides transparency. Transparency is a big one with this. Students, ultimately all of the benefits of this AP filter down to the students, where all employees will be working within a standard that's conducive to the integrity of this district. Further, the employee standard of conducts are mandated by government for all employees who work in public sector. and in meeting compliance with WorkSafe BC in addressing regulation for employers around impairment in the workplace, which is mentioned in this AP. You've all had an opportunity to review and read the topics. Expectations for staff, professional conduct, which has a reference to the bullying and harassment AP, and a hyperlink to that revised AP. Inclusion, relationships with students, smoke-free environment, drug, alcohol, and medication use. This article in particular was vetted and rewritten. We went back and forth a number of times with legal counsel to ensure compliance with the law on this one. Professional attire, confidentiality and privacy, social media, appropriate use of district property, off-duty conduct, criminal conduct and compliance with the law, professional qualifications, conflict of interest, and duty to report. A number of these topics reference current policies and APs that are already in place. Consultation meetings were held with our key stakeholder groups, senior staff, DAS, principals, and both unions. These meetings generated great discussions and provided an opportunity to gather valuable feedback. Consequently, there were a number of revisions made based on the feedback that was received. We did have some help in assuring the legal aspect of this document. The entire document has been vetted by legal counsel. This AP is a hybrid of our current APs contained all in one document. And keeping in mind that this is a living document and will be updated as needed based on changing legalities and regulation requirements. This document, AP 428, will ultimately be the district's primary standards. Individual school codes of conduct will need to align with this document. Rollout is slated to begin very soon after this process is completed. This is our final step in completing the AP. Principals and managers will then review with their staff initially and annually. It will become a part of our onboarding process. And our intent is to have it available electronically for employees to access. And then supervisors can then go on and see. Employees will also be acknowledging that they've read and understand the AP, and supervisors can then go on and run a report to see that all employees have done that. The current bullying and harassment AP 425 has recently been revised and is also slated to be rolled out once this process is complete. We're looking at putting both of them out together. This document and the bullying and harassment AP is also part of our new hire onboarding process. So as I said, we're going to get all of the new employees coming on board. We'll be reviewing this, and all of our existing employees will be reviewing it with their supervisors, and then it'll be an annual review, which is already in place right now with the bullying and harassment, so this will become part of that as well. And that's it. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Will. He's going to talk about the bullying and harassment.
Thank you, Colleen. Just gonna make sure this is, there it is. All right. Well, thanks for having me today. I'm the Manager of Occupational Safety and Wellness, Will Dirksen, and am I the last one for the night? All right, so I hear you loud and clear. Okay, so on that note, I just wanted to actually say this is another legacy from Bob Essinger, who did some work on finding best practices and upgrading our pre-existing bullying harassment procedure. So if you went into a school today, you'll see on every school a framed copy of the 2004 bullying harassment procedure, which was in its day was quite advanced actually, but it needed some work to bring it up. There's a lot of things have happened. They didn't even use the word bullying back then, so it was just harassment. So that was, I'm just going to review some of the changes we made to upgrade it. You can see on the screen there, we have a purpose, right? Very clear laid out purpose. And in this we've added bullying to the statement, and it discourages bullying. So NLPS considers bullying harassment in any form to be totally unacceptable and will not be tolerated, and it will not tolerate its occurrence. In the definitions, since 2004, we now have WorkSafe BC language. So this definition actually reflects that. So in WorkSafe, it includes any inappropriate conduct or comment by a person towards an NLPS employee that the person knew or reasonably ought to have known would cause that employee to be humiliated or intimidated, but excludes any reasonable action taken by NLPS or supervisor relating to the management and direction of employees or the place of employment. So it provides a WorkSafe language. It also references, since then we've come a long ways as far as modern technology, right? So it references cyberbullying and sending mean or threatening emails or texts, posting embarrassing photos of someone online. I could go on, but it references like all the type of electronic forms. Discrimination, things have changed since then as well. We now include national or ethnic origin, religion, gender identity or expression, genetic characteristics, and then another addition on a record of suspension. So that's been updated. Oops. Just back up here. Sorry about that.
I don't feel well.
Just wait, close your eyes for a second. I'll get back to where this is. Yeah, we're almost there. How'd that happen? I don't know. All right, there you go. So, my apologies. Well, there's a little excitement. Difference between bullying, harassment, and discrimination. So it puts a clear definition between harassment and discrimination. Anyway, identifies what bullying harassment is not, right? So it's not expressing differences of opinion. It's not offering constructive feedback or guidance or advice. It's not making legitimate complaint about someone's conduct through established procedures. It's not supervision of employees. So that it clarifies that. Employees' responsibilities, and it describes what the employees' responsibilities are: refraining from engaging in bullying harassment, reporting occurrence, applying and complying with NLPS policy and procedures, and participating in training. And this next section clarifies duties to inquire and follow up. So if someone's informed of bullying harassment, and someone says, "Oh, don't tell anybody." No, we have a duty to inquire now. It's not something. It's something we have to treat seriously and act upon. And also counseling services being available, making sure that people are aware that we have EFAP services, employee family assistance. It has the steps to the complaint process, so the speak up process, more of a non-formal type, and then followed by the formal type, which has actually it's written and a process and mechanism in place for that. And then resolution that would be shared with both parties. And it also provides for no retaliatory action. And to just make sure that the process isn't abused at all, that prevents, there's a section there to prevent vexatious or malicious complaints. The training responsibilities, just want to make sure you knew, for the last 2 years, we've been providing training that directly correlates with this bullying harassment procedure already, that we do with all staff annually. So at the beginning of September every year, we review bullying and harassment with all our staff and the prevention of. So that just, in a nutshell, is our updated, so I hope to have it soon up on our website and with a modern, fresh AP 425. So thank you for your time. And sorry about the... Seasickness. My brain feels like that sometimes. All right.
Seeing if there are any questions? No? Thank you for your clarity on the onboarding piece of information. That was really useful to have. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
It's important.
All
All right, thank
And
you.
thank you. I'm wondering if we have any questions that we've received? None that we know? Okay. Then I will seek a motion to, look at that, a motion to adjourn. Trustee Minutes, Trustee Keller, we are adjourned before 9.